Chapter 443. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was indeed very old, but Tian Jingren was even older. According to Jingjiu's deduction, Tian Jingren had left the South Ocean 600 years ago to search for an heir on behalf of the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nanchu. In the end, he had chosen Jian Shilai as the guide. As such, he should be at least 700 years old by now. His talent in cultivation was ordinary, but his mental strength was rare in the world. After cultivating for more than 700 years, his psyche power could move heaven and earth. Logically speaking, it would be difficult for him to meet an opponent. Unfortunately, though he was good at telling others' fortunes, he didn't expect his own fortune to be so bad. First, he had encountered Jingjiu and Zen Master in Jiaoga City, and now he had encountered someone like Yin San. Most importantly, he thought that this was a trap set up by him and the great ancestor of the mysterious dark sect. He didn't expect that he would be the victim and suffer a crushing defeat. He didn't even have time to commit suicide before his spiritual soul was completely controlled by Yin San. Your plan is actually quite good. Yin San looked at the great ancestor of the mysterious Yin sect with an appreciative expression. The great grandmaster of the mysterious sect was very embarrassed. He rubbed his red nose and said, "After spending a long time with Jinren, I can always learn some true scriptures." After Yin San escaped from the sword jail of Green Mountain, he went to the South Ocean to look for the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, and brought Shi Wang's son back to Chaotian to lay the groundwork for taking back the old ones. Afterwards, he went to the Cold Mountain and found the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect, traveling together for 20 years. In the past 20 years, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had been Yin San's bodyguard, servant, sidekick, assistant, and old dog. No one wanted to be a dog, let alone a great devil like him. Given the Black Yin ancestor's level of demonic arts, it would be extremely easy for him to kill Yin San. All he needed to do was move a finger or even blow a breath. The problem was, until today, he still had no idea what method Yin San had used to hide him from the Aoyama sword formation. He didn't want to return to the bottom of the cold mountain either. The years of not seeing the light of day were really hard to bear, especially since he had already come out. How could he have the courage to go back? If he wanted to get rid of Yin San and break the dog leash around his neck, he had to find a way to kill Yin San without being discovered by the sword formation of Green Mountain. He once had the idea of the turtle shell on the shore of Ozawa, but later he found that Emperor Shao was actually the most determined follower of Yin San, so he had to give up the idea. Then he naturally thought of another hidden swordsman, and his sight fell on the misty island in the distant South Sea. In the Guoqing Temple, he got in touch with Su Zai, who had joined the Western Sea Sword School, through the fat monk in the back kitchen. He told Su Zai his identity and suggested that the godly swordsman of West Ocean do something with him. Though it was a secret that the Western Sea Sword School was a branch of the Foggy Island, it was not difficult for an old devil like him to figure it out. Whether it was killing Yin San or Jingjiu, it was an irresistible temptation for the godly swordsman of West Ocean, as long as he knew the true identities of these two people. In the beginning, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect thought that he could use the method of the Misty Island to conceal his energy after killing Yin San, so that the sword formation of Aoyama wouldn't discover him. Later, he found that Yin San was interested in the first child sword, so he came up with a better solution. When Yin San tried to control Tian Jingren, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect would suddenly launch a sneak attack, allowing Tian Jingren to control Yin San's spiritual soul and find the method to evade the sword formation of Aoyama. As Yin San said, it was a good plan or even a perfect one. There was only one problem. Yin San knew it. Yin San didn't tell the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect a lesson. He was fully aware that Jingjiu had a backup plan, no matter whether it was the emperor or Aoyama, but he didn't tell the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect about it. He watched calmly as the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was penetrated by Lu Ci's sword and was severely wounded, almost dying. After the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect woke up by the bank of Ozawa, he understood everything. He crawled out of the bucket of blood naked and knelt before Jingjiu, expressing his regret and begging for Jingjiu's forgiveness while weeping bitterly. In the end, he sold the Western Sea Sword School out. In-san pulled out a piece of straw from the pile of straw and put it in his mouth, chewing it slowly. Looking at the rising sun in the distance, he said tiredly, "Don't do it again." The great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect stood up hastily. He stood like a child with his hands pressed against the seams of his trousers, saying, "I won't dare do it again." He had almost died in the Guoqing temple. This lesson was enough to make him understand why the white ghost didn't show up that day. The principal guard of Aoyama was a troublesome opponent for the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect even when he was in his prime, but that white ghost behaved like a castrated cat in front of the immortal. Why was he so afraid of the immortal? The fat monk in the back kitchen of the Guoqing temple had died suddenly, so he couldn't eat the steamed buns dipped in fermented bean curd and the roasted meat wrapped in perilla leaves anymore. The restaurant in Haijo City was the place where the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect and the West Ocean would contact each other. Unexpectedly, it was the property of Bulo Lin. From the West Ocean to the East Ocean, and from the Snowland to Penglai, the whole of Chaotian was under the watch of the immortal. Though the immortal was not omnipotent anymore, he still seemed to be omniscient. This feeling was truly terrifying. What he didn't know was that the strike the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect struck the unicorn in the Guoqing temple seemed ferocious, but it didn't cause any real harm. Looking at the handsome and nonchalant young man on the pile of rice, the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect sighed inwardly, asking, "Has the immortal already found out the whereabouts of the first child's sword?" Tian Jingren was lying under the pile of rice with his eyes closed, still breathing. In-san shot him a glance and said, "I've also learned something else." As the guide of the foggy island in the South Ocean to Chaotian, Tian Jingren knew many secrets, and he was extremely familiar with the Western Sea Sword School. "Congratulations, immortal," said the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect with an enchanting smile. In-san jumped down from the pile of rice, and headed toward the distance after dusting off the grass on his body. The great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect picked up Tian Jingren and followed him like an old dog holding a bone in its mouth. They headed toward the direction of the rising sun, but it was unclear where they were headed. "Have you ever heard of a sword style called falling from the sky?" Zhao Layer had heard Jingjiu ask this question before. It was many years ago in Haijo City, when they were wanted criminals by the Pure Heaven Bureau, and the cultivation practitioners of various sects participating in the Four Seas banquet were prepared to kill them. The clouds and fog grew thinner and thinner until they had completely dispersed. The sword wills in the cliffs grew more formidable, as if they were eager to strike. Even though she had never seen it before, Zhao Layer had guessed that it was the aura of the sword formation of Aoyama. The sword formation of Aoyama hadn't been activated in the last 300 years after Taiping Jinren stayed behind death doors, and there wasn't even a sign that it would be activated. In the last year, the sword formation of Aoyama had shown signs of being activated twice, and the sword peaks had been exposed to heaven and earth and the disciples of the peaks twice, which was quite shocking. The last time the sword formation of Aoyama was activated was to kill the great Grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect in the Guoqing temple from a distance. What was the reason this time? As she was thinking of these questions, the clouds and fog returned to the peaks, and the sword formation of Aoyama calmed down, indicating that the target had disappeared. It was difficult to activate the sword formation of Aoyama, and it was even harder to stop it. Jingjiu knew that person was his big brother, because he was the only one who understood the working pattern of the sword formation of Aoyama and turned the sword formation of Aoyama into a sword 10,000 miles away. He used this sword to force the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect to stay by his side as a bodyguard, and he could also use the power of the sword formation of Aoyama to do something he couldn't do in his current cultivation state, like what he had done earlier. Judging from the direction the sword formation of Aoyama was aimed at, the person he wanted to deal with was probably Jian Shilai. The 9 peaks of Aoyama were haunted, like Fang Jingtian and those who hid more deeply. Among the 4 principal guards, the chickens and dogs didn't ascend to heaven, but they would still support him. Audacious Ah Dan didn't dare offend either side, and the round turtle only knew how to sleep. And the sword formation of Aoyama was like a toy to him. No matter what, his big brother still had a strong foundation in Aoyama. It was hard to say who would win if they were to fight face to face in the future. Jingjiu was certain that it was the fairy lady Bai Ren who had knocked him down to the mortal world. The formation of dispersed smoke and cloud must have been tampered with by his big brother, but the tampering might have been done many years ago, like 400 years ago. It was a pity that he couldn't kill his big brother in the Guoqing temple. If he hadn't passed out, he would have asked the emperor to kill his big brother first and leave him alone. No matter how secretive it was impossible to hide it from everybody. If Yamatsai and the other orthodox cultivation sects learned that his big brother had escaped, they would start a war. At the very least, the Zhongzhou school would take this opportunity to make trouble. Nobody could forget what his big brother had done in Chaotian back then because of so much bloodshed. The storm would come again. If it were before, Jingju wouldn't worry too much, but he was still too weak at the moment. He looked at his right hand, remaining silent for a long time. His badly deformed right hand looked like a plum blossom tied up by a rope in a pot. If it were a real plum blossom, one might be able to find a different sense of beauty in its deformed appearance. But this was a hand. The cultivation practitioners yearned for perfection. As such, many masters in Aoyama thought that Jingjiu would have a bright future when they saw his face. It was because his face was too perfect. If it wasn't perfect, it meant that there was something wrong with it, and it was not as simple as looking ugly. His right hand was his most powerful weapon. If it couldn't be repaired, it would affect his fighting prowess and his cultivation in the future. He had recuperated on the sword peak for half a year, but his condition had only improved a bit. At this rate, it would take him thousands of years to completely repair his right hand. Jingju felt a bit depressed. This was a rare emotion for him. Of course, he seldom had such emotions to begin with. If it were back then, he would have killed a highly achieved swordsman of the Zen sects like Monk Duhai with a single finger. It was impossible for him to sustain such a severe injury. Recalling the incident when Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui pursued his big brother, Jingjiu asked, "That bone flute couldn't even be cut by Shisui's sword?" "Mine couldn't either," Zhao Liu said. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "Let's go to the Shangda Peak." The Shangda Peak was very cold. Most of the trees on the peak were pine trees that could withstand the cold. It wasn't very nice to look at, mainly because it was too monotonous. One would get tired of looking at it for a long time. Standing at the foot of the peak, Jingjiu and Zhao Liu could already feel the cold wind coming from up ahead. The Shangda Peak was the most strictly guarded place among the 9 peaks of Aoyama. The regular disciples were strictly forbidden from entering and exiting it. If they didn't want to reveal their identities, they had to find a way to get in by themselves. Thinking of the unfeeling temperament of the Master Sword Justice, Zhao Liu said, "Should I ask Yuan Chu to come here and open the way?" It was normal for the master to ask his disciple to come here to do anything, like entering through the back door. "I'm more familiar with this place than he is." Jingjiu led Zhao Liu into the peak. They didn't walk along the mountain path, but went straight into the pine forest. The cold wind caressed the branches, making the pine trees rustle. Jingjiu was indeed familiar with this place. There was no path, and there were only thick pine needles as far as the eye could see, but he could find the direction easily. Soon, they arrived at a cliff in the west and found a manor cave. The temperature here was even colder than at the foot of the peak. If one wasn't a cultivation practitioner, he would have to wrap himself in several cotton-padded clothes to withstand the cold. Zhao Lei followed Jingjiu into the manor cave, but found nothing inside. It must have been deserted for many years. There was a stone wall in the deepest part of the manor cave. She reached out her hand to touch it and found that the surface was extremely hot. She was surprised to find that the entire wall was made of fire jade. There was a forbidding spell attached to the stone wall. Jingju waved his hand to remove it and led her to continue walking. They passed through several narrow cracks and entered a dark passage. The deeper they went into the passage, the lower the temperature became. The ice and frost on the stone wall grew thicker and thicker. After a long while, they had finally reached the end of the passage. It was a broken cliff. In front of the cliff was an abyss, or in other words, a large cave leading to the underground. A ray of sunlight shone down from a high place, illuminating the bottom of the cave. A huge black dog, as large as a mountain, was lying at the bottom of the cave in silence. The light from the sky illuminated the glossy black fur on its body. It looked like the most expensive satin. Jingjiu led Zhao Lei drifting down. The black dog opened his eyes and looked down at them, the expression in his eyes cold and nonchalant. She is the master of the Shima Peak, Zhao Lei, and he is the dead dog. Jingjiu introduced them to each other. The black dog lowered his head slowly, indicating that he had met her. Zhao Lei bowed to him earnestly. The black dog closed his eyes again. Jingjiu fell silent while looking at him, and then turned around and walked toward the sword jail. It was very cold in the sword jail, and the air was very dry. The energies coming out from the cells on both sides of the passage were very formidable. Some of these prisoners were powerful demons, and some were the swordsmen of the underworld, and some were deviant practitioners whose hands were stained with blood. Based on Zhao Lei's temperament, she should be very curious about the stories of these prisoners, and she might even find an opportunity to test her sword skills. Yet, for some reason, she didn't even take a look at those cells. Senior Master Tai Lu is locked up in this cell. You should call him Senior Grandmaster. Jingjiu found Zhao Lei didn't respond, so he turned his head around and found she was lost in thought about something. What's the matter? Nothing. I just thought that maybe we should keep a dog in the Shima Peak. Zhao Lei asked Jingjiu earnestly after she came back to her senses. Jingjiu said after some thought, Yuan Qijing won't agree. Zhao Lei looked at him in bewilderment. She gestured the length with her hands, saying, I meant raising such a big dog. Why do you want to keep a dog all of a sudden? Asked Jingjiu, bewildered. There are monkeys, cats, and cicadas on the peak. Oh, and the horse you brought back. What's so scary about keeping a dog? Zhao Lei said, We can guard the door when we go out, but we can't count on that lazy cat. Why do we want to keep a dog? The dog is very loyal. Why? The master dead dog is very handsome. The two of them came to a grand hall in the deep end of the sword jail while talking casually. The floor of the grand hall was paved with green stones, and there were lamps in the surroundings. It was much brighter and warmer than the other places in the sword jail. There was a passage on their right side, leading to the deep end of the place under the illumination of the lamp. There was a cell at the end of the passage. The most formidable sword wills in Chaotian filled the passage and outside the cell. Sensing the sword wills, Zhao Lei's expression changed slightly, and she glanced at Jingjiu reflexively. These are the sword wills I had back then. Jingjiu led her to the cell at the end of the passage. When Jingjiu came to see Lu Shui a few years ago, he merely took a look at the cell, but didn't enter it. It was because he didn't want to see the scene in the cell. Now that it was his sword wills, they would be unlocked as he stepped into the cell. It didn't take long before Jingjiu and Zhao Lei arrived in front of the cell and pushed open the door. The cell was well furnished, with a bed, a table, and all kinds of utensils, a small spring, and even a magic treasure that projected the blue sky and white clouds. There was only one such cell in the sword jail. Looking at the white skeleton on the bed, Zhao Lei had guessed who had been imprisoned in this cell. Yet, Taiping Jinren had escaped from the sword jail 30 years ago. Why did he become a white skeleton? Jingjiu walked to the front of the bed and found that the right arm of the white skeleton had been broken off from the elbow. Oh, that's why. In the whole of Aoyama, he and his big brother had the deepest understanding of all in one sword. As such, the flying sword didn't look like a sword, but more like a flute. Looking at the white skeleton in silence, Jingjiu seemed to have seen many scenes. In this isolated cell, his big brother cultivated silently. He had spent countless years and endured excruciating pain. In the end, he had tempered his arm into a flying sword. Then, he tore his right arm away from his body. The amount of pain he could endure indicated how much pain he had suffered from the betrayal of Jingjiu, Lu Xi, and Yuan Qijing. Now that he thought about it, all this pain was hatred, right? Zhao Lei understood what Jingjiu meant. She moved her gaze from the broken arm of the white skeleton to his deformed right arm, thinking that they were indeed brothers. End of this chapter. Chapter 444. If the situation is still the same the day after tomorrow, I will report to everyone. The way to heaven will not be updated today and tomorrow. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 445. The path toward heaven will be updated late at night today. I don't have time to write before 8 o'clock, so there's no need to wait. I'm typing, please wait a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 446. It was the Western Sea Sword School who leaked the location of Tianjingren's manor cave to Insan on purpose, in an attempt to cooperate with the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect in order to complete this earth-shattering transaction. The man wearing the conical hat and walking into the restaurant in Haijo City was the middleman who was acceptable to both sides. The scheme of the Western Sea Sword School failed, and it was a humiliating one, and they suffered a great loss. But the man wearing the conical hat didn't worry about being punished, because he was the guest of the Western Sea Sword School and had a special status. Besides this matter, he had many other important missions, so he believed that the godly swordsman of West Ocean would be patient enough with him. After leaving Haijo City, he didn't go back to the Western Sea Sword School. Instead, he took the vehicle of the Imperial Court through the Pure Heaven Bureau, and arrived in Yu County after passing through many states and counties. The north of Yu County was not far from the Cloud Dream Mountain, so it was more likely that he would encounter the orthodox cultivation practitioners. He didn't want to encounter too many troubles, so he went to the precious warehouse in Guiyun City and auctioned a rare but ordinary 1,000-year-old lotus seed. This agreement had been made more than 10 years ago, and he wasn't sure if the person arranged by the other party could hold on until now. Moreover, the other party had already left the Zhongzhou school, and his whereabouts were unknown. The 1,000-year-old lotus seed was bought by someone that night, and it was delivered to the Cloud Dream Mountain the next day. On the fourth day, the man wearing the conical hat saw Bai Zhao. "I didn't expect it to be you," he said. Bai Zhao was still as feeble as before, and his voice was even more nonchalant as he said, "I want to know who you are." The man took off the conical hat and the black mask on his face, exposing his green face. Bai Zhao arched his eyebrows slightly, saying, "Do you know that, if the disciples of the orthodox sects knew you were in Guiyun City, you would be killed for sure? There were many deviant practitioners in the world, and many of them had strange appearances, but few had a green face." Su Zai said with a faint smile, "I'm the guest of the Western Sea Sword School, so they have no reason to kill me. You should know that I was no longer the young master of the Xianyin sect many years ago. The Xianyin sect has nothing to do with me anymore. Bai Zhao didn't say anything more but asked, He Zhan has gone to White Town. Why do you want to see my big brother? Su Zai shot a deep glance at her and said, Since the lotus seed of 1,000 years is in your hands, you should know the original plan between me and Tong Yen. Bai Zhao said, Shi Xiang told me. But I still don't understand. Even if you obtain the sword god's trust, how can you kill him? Su Zai said, I told him that I had a way. It's because I happened to know that two formidable figures were plotting against the West Ocean. Bai Zhao said, Even you feel afraid. If we join hands with them, won't it be like asking a tiger for its skin? Su Zai said, I'm looking for the immortals Tan and Bai. He used to be the young master of the Xianyin sect and was famous for his excellent talent. Back then, he was even more talented than Lo Huainan, but he was far from qualified to negotiate with the two immortals of the Zhongzhou school. There was only one explanation. He was a middleman, representing the will of those two formidable figures. What do they want? Bai Zhao asked. Su Zai said, After the Western Sea Sword School is destroyed, the spiritual source will belong to our Xianyin sect. Bai Zhao said, Nobody in this world is worth a spiritual source. Su Zai said, Back then, Tong Yen promised to give me a spiritual source from Kunlun Mountain. I've merely changed my choice. Now that the Zhongzhou school considers itself the leader of the orthodox cultivation world, how can they be so shameless as to occupy the spiritual source of the West Ocean? Bai Zhao said with a small smile, You have just said that you are no longer the young master of the Xianyin sect, and the Xianyin sect has nothing to do with you. Su Zai said, If I can handle this matter well, the Xianyin sect will be mine again. Bai Zhao suddenly asked, Does it have anything to do with the incident in the Guoqing temple? Su Zai said, Those old men can crush us with one finger. We just need to fulfill our duties as messengers and don't ask about anything else. Rest assured, Bai Zhao said, I won't tell anybody else about this matter. Su Zai added, including Jing Jiu. Bai Zhao shot him a glance, saying nothing. What happened to Tong Yen? Su Zai asked. Bai Zhao said, Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. Su Zai smiled, looking like a green leaf blown by the wind. Looking at the streets of Guiyun City outside the window, he said, Back then, Lo Huainan was killed here. You should know that it was Tong Yen who was avenging you. What are you trying to say? Bai Zhao asked. Lo Huainan is dead, and Tong Yen has betrayed us. The situation in Aoyama is not any better. You two claim to be the leaders of the orthodox sects, but it seems that your sects are even more chaotic than our deviant sections. Su Zai pulled back his gaze and asked Zhao Leu, Have you ever wondered why? The situation in Aoyama was indeed chaotic, but Jing Jiu and Zhao Leu didn't know that yet. After returning to the Shinma Peak, Jing Jiu threw the sword of the universe back to Gu Qing, saying, Give it to me before you leave. Zhao Leu shot him a glance, wondering if he was going out again. This wasn't like his temperament. Did the white bones in Taipingzhenren in the sword jail remind you of something? Gu Qing took the sword of the universe and found that the desolate feeling on the sword was a bit weaker, or in other words, the feeling had penetrated deeper into the body of the sword. Yuan Chu came over curiously, his eyes full of envy. Gu Qing smiled and handed the sword of the universe to Yuan Chu, beginning to report to Jing Jiu and Zhao Lei. Over the years, he had been in charge of all the affairs related to the Shinma Peak, like the Precious Tree House and Zhaoga City. It was a complicated affair. Many things had happened in the last half a year. A small monster invasion had been repelled in the Snowland, but it was unclear what it meant. The atmosphere in Zhaoga City had gradually changed. The chancellors who supported Prince Jing Xian had sent a memorial again, as if they wanted to do something. The Platonist sect had decided to hold a clean heart meeting 3 years later. It was unclear if it meant that the Grandmaster couldn't hold on any longer. Zhao Lei glanced at Jingjiu again, wondering if Jingjiu was going to the Platonist sect to help Sensei kill someone. Gu Qing continued. Nobody had found any trace of Tong Yen in the last half a year. Judging from the movements in Zhaoga City and the Center sect, the important figures on Cloud Dream Mountain were very angry. Then, Jingjiu recalled what Jingjiu had told him back then and told her about the development of the mysterious dark sect over the last few years and the current situation in detail. Why do you have to tell me so much about such a trivial matter? Jingjiu wondered why Gu Qing had become so talkative. It seemed that he should learn the vow of silence. Zhao Lei glanced at Jingjiu again and asked, "Didn't you say you wanted to kill Wang Xiaoming?" 10 years ago, the mysterious dark sect became a church, and Wang Xiaoming was the first church master. In the eyes of the common people, this new swordsman of the deviant sects was very mysterious, but Zhao Lei couldn't forget his name. Jingjiu had forgotten about this matter a long time ago. He remembered it after being reminded by Zhao Lei and signaled for Gu Qing to continue. Gu Qing felt quite innocent, but his expression didn't change. He took out a sword letter and handed it to Zhao Lei with both hands, saying, "The Aoyama has summoned all the peaks for a meeting. Because you are behind closed doors, the meeting has been postponed until now." Zhao Lei felt a bit surprised, thinking that the Aoyama was going to hold a meeting again. Who was the reason this time? It couldn't be because of Lu Shisui again. It's indeed about Lu Shisui. Looking at her expression, Gu Qing said with a wry smile, "Senior brother Zhuoruzhui is really a blabbermouth. He talked too much about what happened in the Guoqing temple. In the end, it was a slip of the tongue, and people knew that Lu Shisui had been there." When Lu Shisui was imprisoned in the sword jail for the second time, the Shenma Peak didn't do anything. So many years had passed in the blink of an eye. In fact, many people had guessed that Lu Shisui had left, but they didn't have any proof, so no one dared to question the Shanghai Peak. Now that it was confirmed that someone had seen Lu Shisui in the Guoqing temple, of course, those people would take this opportunity to make trouble. Fang Jingtian didn't have to show up in person. Naturally, the elders of the Shilai Peak would demand an explanation from the Shanghai Peak and the Shenma Peak. Zhao Lei took a look at Jingjiu for the fourth time. She wondered if Zhuoruzhui had done this because of the immortal sect master's order, or was it his own idea? Jingjiu thought of the meeting in the Shilai Peak's hall and felt bored. He walked straight into the cave, ignoring Gu Qing. Gu Qing looked at Zhao Lei innocently. Zhao Lei handed the sword book back to him and followed Jingjiu into the cave. Even if someone wanted to use this opportunity to attack the Shenma Peak, she didn't care. Now that the identity of Jingjiu had been confirmed, who would dare to be presumptuous in front of the sect master and the sword justice? The atmosphere in the Shilai Peak's hall was a bit depressing. After confirming that Zhao Lei and Jingjiu had left the Sword Peak, the meeting in Aoyama began. But until now, no one from the Shenma Peak had come. Fang Jingtian sat in the main seat, silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Someone suddenly yawned. Many people looked over and found that it was Zhuoruzhui. Elder Mo and Elder Bai Guananshan and other disciples were fighting the enemies in the snowfield. He was the representative of the Tianguang Peak to attend the meeting in Aoyama. "Senior Masters, why are you looking at me? I didn't admit that I saw Lu Shisui. What the monks of the Guoqing temple say has nothing to do with me." Zhuoruzhui yawned and said, "Even if the monks of the Guoqing temple didn't lie, we still have to ask the Shanghai Peak first." His opinion was the same as that of Zhao Lei. The sword attack in the Guoqing temple made him very clear about the relationship between the master and the Shenma Peak. He didn't believe that the incident of Lu Shisui could cause any big wave. As for the relationship between the Shanghai Peak and the Shenma Peak, he didn't know anything about it. But as a disciple of the Tianguang Peak, he would never hesitate to find trouble with the Shanghai Peak. The masters of the peaks thought what Zhuoruzhui said was reasonable. Lu Shui, who should have been locked in the sword jail, was suddenly found in the Guoqing temple. No matter how they looked at it, it was the problem of the Shanghai peak. As a result, all the gazes fell on the elder of the Shanghai peak, Qi Yan. The look on Qi Yan's face was terrible. He truly didn't know anything about it. "Please wait a moment," he said sternly. "Shanghai peak will give you an explanation." The Shanghai peak was innocent in the incident of Lu Shui leaving the sword jail, but now it had to bear the greatest pressure, so it was natural that it was displeased. As a result, the top of the Shima peak was greeted by a snowstorm. The 3-foot sword along with the wind and snow represented the will of the justice of Sword Yuan Qijing. Zhao Lei was behind closed doors. Gu Qing reacted as quickly as she did. He had already left the mountain in advance. Lu Ada brought cold cicada and hid in the deep part of the manor cave, and stayed behind closed doors with Zhao Lei. There was only one person left on the Shima peak. He had to face the cold and formidable 3-foot sword alone. Kneeling before the 3-foot sword, Yuan Chu said innocently, "Great-granduncle, you can't blame me. Where is Jingjiu?" Yuan Qijing's indifferent voice came out from the 3-foot sword. Yuan Chu said while pointing at the ocean of clouds, "Senior Master has left a long time ago." Gu Qing went to the sword-washing stream. The class at the sword-washing hall had just ended, so the masters left the classroom. Lin Wuji and Senior Master Mei Li walked to the stream while talking about something. They were surprised to see Gu Qing. Shinma Peak hadn't taken on any new disciples in recent years, so they shouldn't have come to the sword-washing stream. Lin Wuji was the personal disciple of the immortal sect master, and Senior Master Mei Li was a master of the 2nd generation with a high cultivation state, so they had a high status on Qingrong Peak. They had been teaching the new inner sect disciples by the sword-washing stream over the years, which was a pity for some people, but many people, including Gu Qing, respected them very much. Gu Qing bowed to them with a faint smile, saying, "I'm looking for someone." Lin Wuji and Senior Master Mei Li exchanged a look, and both saw the interest in each other's eyes. "Who?" they asked in unison. Gu Qing recalled the description his master had given him before he left, and drew a face in the air with his finger. The image drawn in the air by his finger couldn't even be considered real, but Lin Wuji could see it clearly. "Ping Yongka?" he asked in surprise. Gu Qing said, "It looks like his talent has left a deep impression on you, big brother." Lin Wuji shook his head and said, "This child's talent is indeed good, but his temperament is a bit eccentric. He likes to have random thoughts all day long." Senior Master Mei Li asked with interest, "You want to take on a disciple?" Gu Qing said with a smile, "I haven't learned the sword work well myself, so I'm not qualified to take on a disciple. It's my master's idea." Lin Wuji's expression changed slightly, saying, "Ping is lucky." Senior Master Mei Li said with a smile, "Let's make sure that the person Shinma Peak is looking for is not him." A moment later, the young disciple named Ping Yongka was called over. Gu Qing looked at him and asked, "Did you go to the Sword Peak a few days ago?" Ping Yongka's face turned pale, wondering if the fact that he had profaned the remains of the masters of the previous generation had been discovered. He said in a trembling voice, "Yes." Gu Qing continued, "Did you see the 2 masters on the Sword Peak?" Ping Yongka didn't think he was lucky anymore. He said innocently, "I have poor eyesight. I really don't know." Gu Qing smiled, thinking that this was indeed the style of the Shinma Peak. No wonder his master had taken a liking to him. He didn't say anything more. He bowed to Lin Wuji and Mei Li, and then left on his sword. Ping Yongka stood there in a daze, confused, wondering what was going on. Senior Master Mei Li and Lin Wuji smiled at the young disciple and said, "Congratulations. I thought I could only write it at night, but I didn't expect that I could squeeze some time, so I wrote it immediately and posted it. But I can't be sure about the situation tomorrow, so I can't update at 8 o'clock in the evening for the next few days. The number of words won't be much either. I can only try to update as much as possible. If I can't, I'll report to you in advance. End of this chapter. Chapter 447. Sitting on the sword of the universe, Jingjiu left the Shinhua Peak, broke through the clouds, and landed in Cloudy Town. He walked into the restaurant, and the horse-drawn carriage arrived when the soup in the pot had been boiled to the point of one finger. The glass window on the roof of the carriage had been replaced with a new one. The arrangement made by the Gu clan was as proper as before. A few days later, the horse-drawn carriage arrived in Chaonan City. Jingjiu went to the Precious Tree House and left after leaving a list of names. Looking at the names of the magic treasures on the list, the owner of the Precious Tree House sweated profusely, thinking that these magic treasures were either the most precious treasures of a certain sect or the legendary treasures that had been lost a long time ago. Where could he find them? Jingjiu didn't take another carriage. He left Chaonan City on foot after buying a conical hat, and arrived at the shore of Ozawa in a few days. Ozawa in the summer was not as cool as people imagined. It was quite hot and stuffy because of the evaporated water vapor. One would sweat even if he didn't move at all, just like the pitiful owner of the Precious Tree House. Perhaps it was for this reason that nobody could be seen on the streets of the small town, save for the constant croaking of the cicadas and frogs. Jingjiu's body could stay soaked in the lava for a few hours, so he wouldn't sweat because of the summer heat. Standing on the street with the conical hat on, Jingjiu listened to the croaking of the cicadas and frogs in silence, as well as the subtle movements hidden behind these sounds. After the swordsmen of Aoyama entered the state of inherited will, they could perceive all the sounds within 100 feet, such as the chirping of the insects and the rustling of the grasses. Jingjiu's perceptive ability was many times stronger. If he didn't use the Zen method of the Guoqing Temple to shield his perceptive ability, the sound of cold cicadas rubbing their palms would be as terrifying as the thunder in his ears. With his 5 senses fully activated, he could hear all the sounds in the small town and even in Ozawa. In the courtyard on the west side, there were a few old men playing mahjong with their feet soaked in a bucket. Their foul language was incessant. He could even hear the sound of the old men's fingertips rubbing against the patterns on the mahjong tiles. He thought to himself, "Why are you so excited about touching a chicken if your beard is of the same color?" Then, he heard many other noises in Ozawa. The shrimps were eating the mud and the fish were eating the grass, and then they were eaten by the big fish. In the end, the greedy big fish was fished out of the water by a wooden fish and became the fisherman's meal that night. Who was the fisherman working for? Wearing the conical hat, Jingjiu walked on the deserted street in the hot summer wind. He didn't go crazy because of the noises, nor did he feel sentimental. All he did was try to find the trace of unnaturalness in the natural noises, and it took him 4 hours to do so. There was a clamshell in the dark gutter of the small town. The sound came from there. It was common for clams to spit water, although this clam was small and dry like a dead clam. Jingjiu walked to the clam and squatted down. He said to the clam, "The hatred between you and Aoyama is the least. In fact, if it weren't for senior brother's instigation, the hatred might not even exist. I think we can discuss something." The clamshell moved slightly, but didn't give any further response. Jingjiu was looking for Emperor Shao. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have thought that the hidden swordsman lived in a clam. But thinking of the saying that a Taoist field was built in a clam, it seemed natural. The clam was just a disguise. It was the tortoise shell that protected Emperor Shao and helped him avoid the search of Aoyama's sword formation. Even if Jingjiu's right hand wasn't injured, he wouldn't be able to cut the tortoise shell. Emperor Zhao's voice came from the clam. "You all know that I live here, but you can't do anything to me. Why should I betray the immortal to you? Can you promise that you won't kill me?" Jingjiu said, "You misunderstood me. I'm not here for that. I just want to borrow your tortoise shell. Emperor Shao said helplessly. If I lend the tortoise shell to you, wouldn't I be seeking death? Jingjiu thought about it and found that it was true. Emperor Shao would never agree to his request. He looked at his deformed right hand and thought that he had to find another way. At this moment, a strong wind suddenly rose on the surface of the Ozawa lake. When Emperor Shao spoke, the overflowing aura alerted the Ozawa swordsmen who had been monitoring the small town. They were rushing over with the wind and rain Taoism. Aoyama and Ozawa had a good relationship, but it was troublesome to meet them. Jingjiu turned around and left. The clam might have sneaked into the depths of Ozawa, or it might have hidden in a well in a courtyard. Emperor Shao had been hiding in Ozawa for so many years. Aoyama's sword formation couldn't kill him. As long as he didn't come out, nobody could do anything to him. Besides, if he didn't make a sound, even Jingjiu wouldn't be able to find him. Jingjiu walked forward in the lake, waving his hands to disperse the annoying water weeds and the ignorant small fish. Thinking of the last cheering sound he heard before he entered the great marsh, he realized that those mortals were playing mahjong in Qing City. That's why they were so happy when they touched a chicken with a tube. Ozawa was very vast, and the water was very deep. The deeper he went, the dimmer the sunlight became, and the thinner the water plants became, turning into a barren land of white sand and stones. The ignorant fish were replaced by the ugly and ferocious big fish and monsters. By the time Jingjiu arrived at the center of the great marsh, which was about 300 feet deep, the bottom of the lake was as dark as the night. Of course, this didn't affect his eyesight in the slightest. As the peculiar snake with silvery glow swam over, Jingjiu halted his steps. Jingjiu looked like a real stone when he was motionless, devoid of energy, smell, or sense of life. Even the divine animals of a higher state couldn't detect his existence, let alone the silvery snake, except for the special beings like the old dragon and the dead dog. Jingjiu had taken Lu Ada with him when he left Aoyama in the past, because he was aware that he would encounter some trouble and strong opponents. This time he left Aoyama to treat his injury, so he didn't want to provoke those strong opponents. Nobody could detect his existence, so there was no trouble. A few days later, Jingjiu walked out of the lake, the water dripping down from his conical hat and clothes, wetting the sandy ground under his feet. This place was the northern shore of Ozawa, 100 miles away. The green reeds were everywhere in the shallow water, and there was a dense forest in front of him, devoid of any signs of human habitation. Jingjiu summoned his will slightly, the sword fire coming out from his body and evaporating the lake water on his body, but he forgot he was still wearing the conical hat. As the conical hat turned into a puff of green smoke and disappeared, Jingjiu's face was exposed. Dozens of sand puppets returned from the lake and were about to return to their nests in the reeds when they saw Jingjiu on the beach. They were startled, the small fish in their mouths dropping down like raindrops. Jingjiu cut off a dozen reeds, and then made a simple hat and put it on his head like how he braided Zhao Liu with one hand. Jingjiu's figure disappeared in the forest. Nobody knew that he had been here, and nobody knew where he was going. Not even the ghosts on Green Mountain knew anything about it. In the following 10 days, Jingjiu headed north all the way, looking for a way to treat his injury. In the Guoqing Temple, Monk Duhai's self-sacrificing strike seemed ordinary, but it was a thunderous strike of Taiping Jinren, so it must be extraordinary. On his journey to the north, Jingjiu seldom took a rest, except that he would take a few mouthfuls of the mountain wind and drink some dew. He didn't feel hungry or thirsty, but he wanted to do something appropriate to the occasion to make himself look like a ferryman. It was said that the luck of the ferrymen wasn't that bad. Jingjiu searched all the manor caves he remembered and the manor caves recorded in his big brother's notebook, and went to a few famous mines, but he didn't find anything useful. As time went by, he felt that his right hand looked worse and worse. Though he knew it was an illusion, he still couldn't stand it. One night, He stood by the cliff's edge and looked at the stars in the night sky, wondering what he should do if the thing in Zhaoga City couldn't treat his injury. By the time Jing Jiu arrived in Zhaoga City, the midsummer hadn't passed yet. The scorching sun shone on the streets, and there was no space for shadows. The pedestrians either held umbrellas or wore conical hats to block the sunlight. Jing Jiu wore the new conical hat he bought in Yuchuan, so he didn't attract much attention. He walked into the alley and arrived at the Jing house. Jing Jiu turned his head around and glanced at Taichung Temple habitually. The newly built Taichung Temple a few years ago looked exactly the same as the old one, but the black eaves didn't look as awe-inspiring as before, probably because it didn't have the rain to moisten it anymore. The eaves looked lifeless now. The door of the Jing house was locked, so the people must have gone out to visit their friends or relative. Looking at the lock, Jing Jiu thought for a while, but he still couldn't remember if it was a day off for the officials of the imperial court, nor could he remember where the key was hidden. As such, he pushed the green brick into the door. All he wanted to do was save a lock for the Jing house, but he didn't expect that the Duke Lu Manor would lose a precious ceramic ware because of this. Walking into the study room and making sure that all the furnishings and the chess pieces on the chessboard were the same as before, Jing Jiu nodded and looked at Lu Ming, the son of Duke Lu, who was standing there reverently, saying, "Ask your father to come here." Lu Ming felt relieved and returned to the State Duke Manor through the underground tunnel. Looking at the broken pieces of the June kiln, he sighed and prepared to enter the imperial palace. Less than an hour later, Duke Lu, who was discussing the state affairs with the emperor, came back. He came to the Jing house through the underground tunnel while panting. In the Guoqing temple, Lu Ming told Jing Jiu that the emperor was under a great deal of pressure and hoped that Jing Jiu would come to Zhaoga City. Unexpectedly, Jing Jiu came here in less than a year, which made Lu Ming feel that his opinion was valued by Jing Jiu. "I didn't expect you to come so soon," he said with a smile. Jing Jiu didn't know why Lu Ming was so happy, saying, "I'm going to Taichung Temple. Is the Center sect still keeping a close watch on me?" Duke Lu was taken aback, and realized that Jing Jiu's coming to Zhaoga City had nothing to do with what he had mentioned. He said with a bitter smile, "The old dragon is dead, and the fiend prison is nothing but an empty shell. The Zhongzhou school will feel humiliated and angry when they see it, so they won't pay attention to the affairs of Taichung Temple." In the afternoon, Jing Jiu, disguised as a caretaker, followed Duke Lu into Taichung Temple, and then disappeared from the courtyard. There was a newly built underground tunnel in the deep end of Taichung Temple, leading to the deep end of the fiend prison. Many green bamboos and wild flowers were planted around the entrance. There was a cluster of purple flowers in a remote corner. Jing Jiu came to the front of the purple flowers, saying, "The bell that had been tied around your neck for a while was picked up from here." Having said this, he remembered that Lu Ada didn't come out with him this time, and was still on the top of the Shima Peak. Jing Jiu shook his head, and reached out his hand to dig the soil under the purple flowers. He was careful not to hurt the roots of the purple flowers. There was a white object buried in the soil under the purple flowers. It was warm to the touch, but it had a faint lethal intent. It was not a beautiful jade, nor was it a magic treasure. It was a piece of bone. Jing Jiu picked up the bone and observed it carefully, saying, "It's solid. How can you play a tune out of it?" Having said this, Jing Jiu remembered that the king of the underworld had died many years ago, and he hadn't fulfilled the promise he had made to the king. Back when Jing Jiu snuck into the fiend prison, he had seen a piece of bone of a large demon in the green pond, which was the stomach of the old dragon. The poison in the green pond was very formidable and had a strong corrosive ability. Even the magic treasures and the fairy swords couldn't survive it, to say nothing of the physical bodies of the cultivation practitioners. That large demon must have been very powerful, probably in the same state as Zen Master's adopted father, which was why the demon bone was indestructible. Before the king of the underworld died, he had used this piece of demon bone to play a lullaby of the underworld river. At the time, Jingjiu had heard this tune in Zhaoga City, in addition to the swordsmen of the human race. Jingjiu came back to the Jing house. Jingjiu walked into the study room and set up a formation to avoid being disturbed. Jingjiu rolled up his sleeve and placed his deformed right arm on the demon bone, rubbing it against the front and the back. In the beginning, Jingjiu moved very slowly, as if he was trying to find the perfect angle and strength. Later, he moved faster and faster, so fast that the naked eye couldn't follow him. Jingjiu had already mastered the angle and strength. More importantly, he was certain that his method was correct. That piece of demon bone was indeed special. It didn't make too much noise even though it was rubbed at such a high speed. A moment later, Jingjiu stopped moving. He lifted up his right arm and looked at it, showing a satisfied expression on his face. In the eyes of regular people, Jingjiu's right arm didn't have any change, but Jingjiu knew that there were some slight changes. It was true that he was sharpening the sword. Many years ago on the top of Bihu Peak, Jingjiu had said that he would use Lu Ada's bone to sharpen the sword. It was a bluff, but it was true this time. The sword wasn't sharp anymore, so it needed to be sharpened again. Jingjiu understood the principle, but he hadn't found a suitable whetstone yet. Even the hardest whetstone in the world would be melted by his right hand. Even the magic treasures and flying swords in Aoyama couldn't withstand his right hand for a while. It wasn't until that day on the Sword Peak, when Jingjiu mentioned the bone flute of his big brother to Zhao Liu, that he thought of the song played by the king of the underworld before his death, and then he thought of this piece of demon bone. Of course, if Emperor Shao was willing to lend the turtle shell to him, it would be the best whetstone for him. A voice suddenly burst out from outside the study room. It was a young man and a young woman, who seemed to be arguing and crying at the same time, and then became silent. Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to them, focusing on sharpening the sword. Jingjiu's right arm was rubbing against the demon bone at a high speed. The bone powder gradually formed, accompanied by a faint burning smell. His expression didn't change. He reached out his left hand and grabbed some rootless water, sprinkling it on his right arm and the demon bone. After a few sizzling sounds, the sound of sharpening the sword became softer. The bone powder was soaked and no longer flew up, but gradually piled up on the table. An exclamation suddenly came from outside the window. Jingjiu knew that someone was outside, but he didn't pay attention to it. A young girl was standing by the window of the study room, her eyes slightly red, indicating that she had just been crying. She looked at the scene in the study room, her face full of disbelief, and asked, "Are you sharpening the skin of your hand? Of so disgusting." End of this chapter. Chapter 448. Jingjiu didn't raise his head, as he continued grinding the demon bone with a focused expression. During the high-speed grinding, the demon bone kept on throwing out bone powder onto the table. There seemed to be many glittering crystals in the powder. The young woman could tell that Jingjiu was not grinding the skin, feeling curious. She even forgot about her sadness, asking, "What are you doing?" Jingjiu thought that he shouldn't have withdrawn the formation for fear of hurting this young woman. Regardless of the relationship between her and Jingli, it was not good to be so noisy. The young woman continued to ask while leaning on the windowsill, "Is this the powder made from the jade clay? It looks really pretty." Jingjiu lifted his head and glanced at her, wondering if he should knock her out. The young woman was taken aback when she saw his face. She covered her mouth reflexively to prevent herself from screaming. "You're really good-looking," she said absent-mindedly. It was indeed an unoriginal statement. Jingjiu paid no more attention to her and continued sharpening the sword with his head lowered. The young woman's gaze moved back and forth between Jingjiu's face and the pile of shiny powder, murmuring, "That's why my aunt said that a woman's beauty is made up of money." It was exceedingly extravagant that someone used the soft jade to make the powder. Even though her family was one of the wealthiest in Zhaoga City, she didn't dare have such an idea. In the next moment, she wondered if Brother Li didn't agree to elope with her because she didn't spend enough money and didn't have the chance to use this kind of powder. Could you give me some of this powder? The young woman begged while looking at Jingjiu. I don't want to be as good-looking as you, but I'd be happy if I could be 1/10 as good-looking as you. Jingjiu of course didn't pay any attention to her. He continued sharpening the sword, trying to make sure that the angle and strength of each strike were perfect. No matter how rare the scene was, it would become boring after a long time. 1 hour later, the young woman had finally disappeared from the window. It could also be because the door of the Jing house was pushed open from the outside. Jing Shang took his father and his wife to the Zhao garden outside Zhaoga City to avoid the summer heat. Though the two families had a close relationship and nothing could go wrong, it was nevertheless the garden of another family, and the Zhao family had a profound foundation in Zhaoga City, which was far beyond the reach of an official of Taichung Temple like Jing Shang. As such, they came back after staying there for about 10 days. Madame Jing took the servants to cook and prepare the dishes. Old Master Jing went to the east wing to check if his bird had lost weight. He was afraid that his grandson would forget to feed it. Jing Shang, on the other hand, brought a bucket and cleaning utensils to the study in advance. He was prepared to scrub the tables and chairs inside like usual. He wanted to make sure that there was not a speck of dust on them. As long as he was in Zhaoga City, he would do it every day. Therefore, no matter which time Jingjiu came, what he saw was the same spotless and unchanged study. Jing Shang pushed open the door of the study and confirmed that there was no change in the furnishings today, except for one more person. He said in surprise, You're back? Jingjiu was focused on sharpening the sword, so he didn't want to be disturbed. But he felt that he should say something when he saw the bucket in Jing Shang's hand and the rag hanging on his arm. Jingjiu was about to tell Jingjiu that he had worked hard over the years, but he felt that he had said it before. Have you eaten? He asked. The Jing family had just come back from the Zhao garden outside Zhaoga City, so they hadn't eaten yet. The smell of rice and vegetables in the kitchen was proof of that. Jing Shang misunderstood Jingjiu's intention and invited him to the living room to eat with him. Jingjiu didn't want to waste his time on something as boring as eating, but he still followed Jing Shang to the living room, intending to spend the precious time gossiping with this family. Jingjiu was not good at gossiping. Looking at the silver-haired and embarrassed expression on his father's face, Jingjiu nodded slightly, thinking that the magic pills given by Gu Qing were quite good. Jingli bowed to Jingjiu respectfully, his eyes full of admiration. Jingjiu didn't ask Jingjiu about his study and cultivation with the Prince Jingyao. It's a bit slow, he said after shooting Jingjiu a couple of glances. You'd better go to Oyama if you can't. Hearing this, Jing Shang felt pleasantly surprised, wondering how he could have such a chance in the immortal state. Yet, Jingli felt frustrated. He was already in the inherited will state, and Jing Yao of the royal family was far inferior to him. Even Gongfeng Jin in the royal palace said that he had an outstanding talent, but it was considered slow. Another possibility was that he might go to Oyama. Though he knew it was a rare chance in the immortal state, he would have to part ways with if he went there. Jingjiu didn't know what Jingli was thinking about, but he wouldn't care even if he knew. The principal guard of Aoyama opened the door for him, and he could learn the sword work from him as long as he was willing to do so. It was a good beginning for any cultivation practitioner. Yet, the cultivation depended on each person himself, no matter who led the way. Everybody had their own ideas, so it was not a pity. Jingjiu returned to the study room and continued sharpening the sword. His hands moved faster and faster, and soon he had made up for the time he had wasted in the living room. The friction between his arm and the piece of demon bone gave off a faint sound, and it gave off a warm feeling, which was quite pleasing to the ears. At least it was pleasing to the ears for him, and it could even be called wonderful. In the next 3 days and nights, he didn't rest for a moment, and he didn't even change his posture. It wasn't until he heard the footsteps outside the window. Jingjiu halted his movement, feeling a bit sore in his arm. This was a rare occurrence for him. The piece of demon bone was indeed too hard. It was mostly because his movements were too fast. If one friction was counted as one wielding the sword, he had wielded the sword at least 100,000 times in the last 3 days and nights. Even the most idiotic swordsman would be able to understand the essence of sword work after wielding the sword so many times in such a short time, let alone Jingjiu. After sharpening the sword for 3 days and nights, he had a new understanding of the sword work, and he had also consumed a great deal of his energy. "Pour me a cup of tea," said Jingjiu. The Jing family naturally wouldn't disturb him. It was the young girl who came to the window. She was the youngest granddaughter in the manor, and had always been doted on by her grandfather. She wouldn't touch any water in any season, including tea, let alone water in the spring. Normally, she should lose her temper when she heard what Jingjiu said, or at least act a bit delicate. However, she pushed open the door of the study room and poured a cup of tea for Jingjiu. It was unclear if it was because she wanted the cosmetics or for other reasons, but she pushed open the door of the study room and poured a cup of tea for Jingjiu, and then stood by the side obediently. Jingjiu took the cup of tea and took a sip. He lowered his gaze and asked, "You know me?" The young girl revealed an uneasy expression and said in a trembling voice, "I know you are immortal Master Jingjiu." Jingjiu thought of Lu Xi and Zhurujui's habits, and found that this was very convenient, so he responded with an The word was very interesting. As the intonation rose and fell, it could express countless meanings. Sometimes it meant agreement, and sometimes it meant doubt, and sometimes it meant anger. The ending of the intonation was also slightly raised, but it could also be used to ask and provoke. For the lazy people of the Aoyama sect, this was indeed a skill that they should master. Jingjiu was of course asking questions. The young girl said timidly, "I heard from Brother Li that you are his little uncle, and he said that you are like a real immortal. I remembered that it was you after I returned to the manor that day." Asked Jingjiu. The young girl said hastily, "Brother Li didn't tell me anything else, and I didn't tell anybody else that you were in Zhaoga City." Said Jingjiu. The young girl felt relieved. Looking at the pile of shiny powder on the table, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "What are you doing?" "Sharpening the sword," said Jingjiu. The young girl was taken aback, wondering where the sword was. "Don't come here again," said Jingjiu. The young girl knew that this was her last chance. She summoned up her courage, and was about to say what she had been thinking about for 3 days. "Don't say it," Jingjiu said. "I don't want to hear any story. Tell Jingli that I drank a cup of tea from you, and that's it." The young girl was taken aback again, but she suddenly understood what Jingjiu meant. She thanked him profusely and ran out of the study room to look for Jingli. Jingjiu set down the teacup and resumed sharpening the sword. This cup of tea was cold, and it had been left there for 3 days and 3 nights. If the young girl had noticed this, Jingjiu might have done more, like asking the royal palace to issue an imperial decree to appoint the marriage. In the early autumn, Jingjiu had finally finished sharpening the demon bone, turning it into a pile of bone powder on the table. Jingjiu walked to the front of the window and raised both of his hands, observing and comparing them with the distant sky as the background. His right arm had been repaired a lot, and it didn't show any obvious deformity, but it was still different from his left arm. For instance, the knuckles of his fingers were a bit protruding, looking like the candied haws on a stick, and his wrist was a bit twisted. The twist of his wrist was actually very small. If one didn't observe it carefully, they wouldn't be able to notice it, but Jingjiu still felt it was an eyesore. Jingjiu couldn't tolerate any nails in his eyes, nor could he tolerate any imperfection. He needed to sharpen the sword further, but the demon bone was gone. Where could he find a new whetstone? The sword of the universe broke through the window on the bookshelf and arrived outside the Jing house at a high speed, hitting a green brick softly. The green brick caved in, and the stone ball rolled down. The State Duke Manor had lost another precious artifact. A moment later, Duke Lu came to the study room panting, wondering what had happened this time. "Take it back and drink it. It's good for your health," Jingju said while pointing to the pile of bone powder on the table. "The taste might be a bit strange. Drink it with strong tea." End of this chapter. Chapter 449. There is no update for The Way to Heaven today. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 450. This piece of bone came from an unknown large demon, so it was precious. But the old dragon's stomach couldn't digest it, so it could only be used after it was ground into powder. Jingjiu was quite satisfied with his arrangement, both in terms of not wasting the bone and in terms of the wisdom of the world. The Zhao clan and the Jing clan were taken care of by Gu Qing. He didn't need to worry about the magic pills sent to him every year. Having done all this, Jingjiu turned around and walked toward the outside of the room, ready to find the next whetstone. Duke Lu was certain that Jingjiu didn't remember what he had said in the Guoqing temple. "The Emperor is under a great deal of pressure right now. Would you like to go to the royal palace to have a look?" The Prince Jing Yao had grown up, which meant that the Prince Jing Xian had been imprisoned for many years. The chancellors and various forces who had connections with the Zhongzhou school became restless again. They had sent many petitions to the royal palace since the year before last, asking the emperor to grant them a favor. After the battle of the Guoqing temple, the pressure became even more obvious. It was because the Zhongzhou school and many people began to suspect that the royal family and Aoyama had reached a new agreement. The emperor could say that he went to the temple to offer sacrifices and happened to be there, but how many people would believe him? Kill Jing Xian, or send him to the Guoqing temple to be a monk. Nobody will make a fuss then. Jingjiu didn't understand the politics of the emperor, nor did he care about it. So his suggestion was straightforward. Logically speaking, this was the best way to solve the current problem, which was what he had suggested back then. The problem was that the best way was not necessarily the most suitable one. To say the word father and son was troublesome, to say nothing of aggravating the conflict. Duke Lu was so shocked by this suggestion that he didn't know what to say. He didn't dare continue discussing this matter with Jingjiu. He thought of something and reported, "I returned the box of golden leaves to the young masterly without your permission a few years ago. What do you think about it?" Jingjiu wondered what the young masterly was. What young masterly? Judging from his expression, Duke Lu knew that Jingjiu had forgotten about it. He said with a smile, "It's the son of the governor in Diuan City. Back when Jingjiu and Guodong traveled the world to recuperate from their wounds, they stayed in a nunnery outside Diuan City for a long time. There, they met a young Master Li who knew how to play the zither. Later on, young Master Li's family declined, and even his last ancestral painting was swindled away by a so-called friend. Before he left Yuan City, Jingjiu left a box of golden leaves for that young Master Li. Unexpectedly, Jingjiu sent it to Zhaoga City, to a subordinate of Duke Lu. Later, when the painting was found, that friend naturally did not have a good ending. Gu Qing was always so reassuring. Jingjiu uttered as he recalled all this. Duke Lu's heart skipped a beat, as he felt that this sound was quite profound and unfathomable. Feeling nervous, Duke Lu said, "The Governor Li submitted a memorial to the throne requesting for Prince Jing Xian to be appointed as the crown prince. That's why he attracted these troubles. However, the evidence of his bribery is irrefutable, so it's impossible to overturn the case. It's already good enough for him to come out and return to Diuan City to be a wealthy man." Jingjiu uttered again. This time, Duke Lu understood the meaning of this It was a calm and steady affirmation. He felt relieved, wiping the sweat off his forehead. It had been 10 years since he had recuperated in the 3000 nunnery. Duke Lu still remembered this trivial matter, just like Jing Shang still remembered cleaning the study room every day. Jingjiu thought he had to respond to Duke Lu's request, so he agreed to let Duke Lu go to the royal palace. Governing a country was as difficult as cultivation, but governing a country was more troublesome, more tedious, and more boring. Jingjiu wasn't good at it, and he didn't want to think about it. All he did was drink tea with the emperor for a while in the royal palace, chatting about what had happened in the Shuiyu nunnery. The emperor glanced at Jingjiu with a spurious smile. If he were still a youth, this smile could be described as a mischievous one. Jingjiu understood what he meant, saying, "You're not allowed to ask." The emperor raised his eyebrows, but didn't continue the topic. He looked at Jingjiu's right hand and asked, "Can it be cured?" "I'll go to the Cloud Dream Mountain to get another fairy book, and I'll be cured immediately." It was impossible for the Zhongzhou school to give him another fairy book. What Jingjiu said could be interpreted as a joke, indicating the difficulty of the matter. After some thought, the emperor said, "I don't know how you're going to cure it. If you need magic pills and magic treasures, you can find some in the royal palace. Let the curtain rollers tell me if you need anything." Jingjiu waved his hand, turned around, and walked toward the outside of the grand hall. His injury couldn't be cured by magic pills. Though there were some good magic treasures in the royal palace, it would be a waste if the magic treasures or heavenly materials of a higher state were not strong enough, like that bird egg. In another palace hall, royal concubine who held the Prince Jing Yao's hand, standing under a tree, anticipating the arrival of Jingjiu. Both she and Jing Yao felt a bit nervous. The former was thinking about the relationship between Jingjiu and the emperor, and what had happened in the capital over the last few years, and the latter was feeling the pressure of meeting the Grandmaster. Yet, they didn't see Jingjiu arrive. All they got was the news that Jingjiu had left the royal palace. Royal concubine who was a bit disappointed, grumbling in a low voice. Jing Yao was merely a teenager, but he could see things more clearly than his mother. The Grandmaster doesn't care about worldly affairs, and he's a true immortal-like figure. It's fate that we can meet him, but it's not a big deal if we can't. Royal concubine who curled her lips and said, "If he really doesn't care about worldly affairs, it's useless for my son no matter how high his cultivation state is." "Mother, you're wrong," Jing Qiao said with a smile. "The Grandmaster is the Grandmaster, and I'm his disciple. The higher the Grandmaster's cultivation state is, the better I am. If the Grandmaster's cultivation state is the highest in the world, I'll be the best in the world." This principle was so simple that even a 15-year-old teenager could understand it. However, those who thought too much, like royal concubine who couldn't understand it, or were unwilling to believe such a simple principle. Many disciples of Aoyama didn't understand it back then, which was why they resented the immortal Jingyang for staying behind closed doors on the Shinma Peak. Like other places in Zhaoga City, the autumn in Duke Lu's manor house was very cold and desolate, but the smell of burning leaves in the distance added to the atmosphere. The blind guest was sitting in the courtyard with his face tilted to the side, listening to the crackling of the burning leaves outside the courtyard wall. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. Suddenly, he heard the movements in the room and his expression changed. He thought to himself, "Which treasure are these two prodigal sons going to destroy today?" There was a flower rack in Duke Lu's bedroom, behind which was connected to a secret and delicate mechanism. Once the mechanism was triggered, the objects on the flower rack would fall down. Over the last 23 years, a few precious porcelain wares had fallen down from the flower rack and broken into pieces, which were enough to buy a nice manor house in Zhaoga City. Lu Ming placed a hollow pastel vase on the flower rack gingerly while holding it in his hands. He felt relieved after making sure the vase wouldn't shake and nothing bad would happen to it. But on second thought, he realized that the vase would eventually break into pieces. He couldn't help but feel it was ridiculous that he had been so cautious earlier. Many people in the imperial court are guessing what kind of agreement the emperor and Aoyama have reached. There are all kinds of guesses, but it's really ridiculous. Duke Lu picked up the teacup and took a sip of the black tea that was the favorite in autumn, saying, "They don't know that it's not the Aoyama who wants to enter Zhaoga City and compete with the Center sect, but the emperor who wants to borrow the sword of Aoyama." Lu Ming said, "The problem is that the Aoyama sect has only sent someone from the Shima Peak, and the immortal masters haven't cultivated for a long time, so I'm afraid that they won't be able to control the situation." Duke Lu glanced at his son, thinking that he knew nothing about it. He didn't say it out loud, but Lu Ming understood his father's intention from the expression in his eyes. He thought resentfully, "If you don't say anything, I of course don't know anything." Thinking of the Emperor's order, Duke Lu said sentimentally, "I used to think that the immortal master Jingjiu was a carefree immortal who didn't know much about the affairs of the world. But today I realize that the immortal master is good at acting." Lu Ming didn't understand, asking, "What do you mean?" The immortal master pretended not to know that the curtain rollers were the eyes of the imperial court all these years, and even I believed him. Isn't his acting good enough? Duke Lu thought of what Jingjiu had given him, and said to his son, "Gather the whole family after dinner. I have something important to say." He paused for a moment and continued, "Just gather your own family members. Don't disturb your Aunt Chi." After dinner, the people of the public house prepared to drink some tea and tell jokes to amuse the High Duke as usual, but they found that the atmosphere tonight was a bit strange. The tea that should have been served long ago had not been served. The High Duke sitting at the head of the table was a bit absent-minded, and the Crown Prince was also often distracted, looking behind him from time to time. Aunt Chi was the youngest sister of the High Duke's wife. Last year, she followed her master to the capital to seek a job and was invited to stay in the public house. She was also a very shrewd old woman. Seeing that the situation was not right, she used a headache as an excuse and left early with her daughter-in-law and granddaughters. Then, all the stewards and servants also left the reception hall, and the door was closed tightly. The 3 generations of the Lu family looked at each other, wondering what was going on. Especially the first branch, who had done a lot of fiddling with the accounts over the years, was extremely nervous. Lu Ming walked to the back and took out a big teapot. He touched the body of the teapot and looked at Duke Lu worriedly. "It's a bit cold. Will it be bad?" Duke Lu said, "The tea is not important. The key is the medicine." Lu Ming's wife stood up hurriedly and said, "I watched it myself and didn't let anybody touch it." Duke Lu had always been satisfied with this daughter-in-law of his. He said with a smile while stroking his beard, "That's all right. Share it with everybody." The tea in the bowls looked black and it was unknown what was inside. However, the masters in the public house were all very astute. Seeing that the High Duke waited for Aunt Chi to leave before speaking, and then looking at the cautious look on Lu Ming and his wife's faces as they divided the tea, and then seeing that the amount of tea in each bowl was almost exactly the same, they naturally knew that this tea must be extremely precious. After the High Duke spoke, without saying anything else, they picked up the tea and poured it into their mouths. The taste of the tea was indeed strange, mixed with powder. It tasted like the flour tea that people on the cold mountain like to eat, and also like the flour paste in Yu County, exuding a faint burnt and fishy smell. It was hard to swallow. Fortunately, the bowls and chopsticks were still there. Some people picked up the chopsticks and started playing. For a moment, the noise could be heard everywhere in the reception hall, as if another meal was about to begin. Some younger grandchildren didn't want to drink the tea after smelling the fishy smell coming from the bowls, but their parents forced them to drink the tea. Duke Lu noticed the expressions and reactions of the crowd. He didn't get angry but felt pleased instead. Back when he chose his youngest son, Lu Ming, to inherit the title of nobility, the other 2 sons of course had their objections, but they took it well and turned their objections and anger into motivation to make money. They didn't do anything too messy, which showed how shrewd they were. In a place like the State Duke Manor, kindness and gentleness were not important. What mattered most was the shrewdness and the ability to judge the situation. Seeing all the tea had been drunk, Duke Lu stroked his long beard again and said, "Very good. I won't tell you what's in the tea. The benefits will show up gradually. You just need to enjoy it." The bone of a powerful demon was of course an excellent tonic, something that could really prolong one's life. The effect of prolonging one's life could only be felt on the day of one's death. However, the people in the State Duke Manor were all smart. Since they had guessed that there would be great benefits, their feelings would affect their feelings, and some of them even felt that they were floating. Lu Ming's wife was one of them. After the crowd dispersed, she and Lu Ming helped the old State Duke back to his room. She felt as if she were walking on soft clouds, and the spot between her eyebrows was slightly hot. She suddenly had a great courage, and knelt down in front of Duke Lu with a thud. End of this chapter. Chapter 451. Seeing this, Duke Lu and his son were startled. Duke Lu glared at Lu Ming, thinking, "Did you go to the brothel again? Didn't I tell you to be more careful?" More careful? Lu Ming was bewildered, not knowing what was going on. He didn't understand his father's expression this time, or else he would have cried out in injustice. Duke Lu was even more furious. He coughed loudly, thinking, "Do you want me, your father-in-law, to help her up personally?" Lu Ming understood this time, and hurriedly helped his wife up. The status of Mistress Lu in the State Duke Manor had always been special. It was not because she was the wife of the prince, but because she was the most beloved daughter of the Prime Minister. More importantly, State Duke Lu suddenly disappeared on the day of her marriage to Lu Ming, which was a big joke in Zhaoga City. The people of the State Duke Manor, including State Duke Lu, had always felt apologetic and embarrassed toward her because of this, so they treated her with great respect. "Qing Han, what are you doing?" Duke Lu looked at his daughter-in-law and asked kindly, "If you have something to say, I will definitely help you." Mistress Lu knew that her father-in-law had misunderstood her, so she hurriedly said, "It has nothing to do with Lu Ming. I want to ask for something else." Hearing this, Duke Lu didn't feel relieved. He frowned even harder and asked, "What is it?" Mistress Lu thought of the family not far away and summoned up her courage to say, "Your daughter-in-law wants to ask you to talk to the Jing family." Lu Ming said unhappily, "Isn't that marriage off the table?" Mistress Lu lowered her head and said, "My niece is more favored than I was when I was at home. She has been trying to kill herself for the past 2 years, making the whole house restless. We have no choice but to talk to the Jing family." Duke Lu said, "When I proposed marriage on behalf of the Jing family, your family rejected me. What else can I say now?" Lu Ming sneered, "Your family only thinks about the lowly position of a merchant, but they never thought that Brother Li is Prince Yao's study companion. Moreover, his family's background is not limited to this." Young Mistress Lu sighed. "Everyone in Zhaoga City knows that the Jing family has an outstanding immortal master, but my father studied in Yamatsai." Lu Ming raised his eyebrows and said, "Although Yamatsai is closer to Zhongzhou School, he is no match for Aoyama. So what? But don't forget that my brothers and relatives are all related to the Dream Cloud Mountain," Madame Lu said with a bitter smile. She then turned to Duke Lu and pleaded, "Father-in-law, please tell the Jing family to stop Brother Li from seeing little Qi anymore. Otherwise, this matter will only get uglier." Naturally, Jing Jiu did not know about this. In fact, he didn't know that the curtain rollers were the eyes and ears of the imperial court either. Before leaving the royal palace, he told the emperor to let the curtain rollers inform him if anything happened. He thought that the curtain rollers would be able to find him no matter where he was since they were scattered all over Chaotian. As for how the emperor asked the curtain rollers to deliver the message, Jing Jiu thought it was a simple matter. because the curtain rollers had already delivered the message for him many times. After leaving Zhaoga City, Jingjiu didn't ride his sword or take a carriage. He avoided the official roads and walked toward the northwest among the mountains. He didn't encounter a single town for a few days, except that he occasionally saw a residential house with smoke rising from a distance in the valley. Other cultivation practitioners might spend this period of time meditating in the mortal world, but as he told Zhao Lei, he didn't think it was meaningful to do so, at least not for himself. There was no mental tribulation to begin with, so there was no point in creating one and then scheming to overcome it. 7 days later, he passed by Jui City. In fact, it was hard to say that he passed by Jui City. In fact, he passed by the mountains 400 miles to the south of Jui City. However, the weather in autumn was too cool and his eyesight was too good, so he could see the dark spot in Jui City. Jui City was 300 miles away from White Town, and 400 miles away from Jui City was 300 miles away. This was the rule he had set for himself. He would never step into the area within 300 miles of the snowland. Back in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting, he was tricked by Taiping Jinren and trapped in the snowland for 6 years. He didn't want to experience such an experience again, and he didn't want to face the queen of the snowy kingdom again. The cold mountain was located to the west of Jui City. As far as the eye could see, there were barren fields, yellowish weeds, and lonely mountains, devoid of any signs of human habitation. Most of the deviant sects and free-traveling practitioners in Chaotian had been driven to this barren world by the orthodox cultivation sections. It was unclear how many demons and dangers were hidden under the seemingly peaceful fields. The orthodox cultivation practitioners were prone to mishaps here. As such, few people came here alone, save for the swordsmen like Fang Jingtian and Yu Qianmen. Jingjiu walked to a wild lake and sat down. The reason the cold mountain was called the cold mountain was because it was very cold here, especially in the recent years when the cold waves in the snowland grew stronger. It was still autumn, but it was as unbearable as it had been in the deep winter. A great deal of thin ice had formed on the surface of the wild lake, cutting the blue sky into many pieces and the perfect face into many beautiful details. Looking at the surface of the lake, Jingjiu wondered what the hardest object in the world was. It was himself. His cultivation state wasn't very high at the moment, so he could still find something to sharpen his sword. Otherwise, when his cultivation state was higher, his sword would be able to grow with him, and even the dragontail inkstone of Yamatsai would be useless to him. As such, he had to cure his right hand as soon as possible. However, the demon bone had already been ground into powder, so where could he find another demon bone of the same state? Did he really have to go to Tsuaping County in Ruzhou and dig up the grave of that mountain demon? However, that mountain demon had died after encountering the thunder punishment, and his corpse had probably turned into green smoke that day. Of course, even if his corpse was still there, he couldn't do so, otherwise that little monk would definitely get angry. Or should he go to Yamatsai and borrow the dragontail inkstone from Shui? If Bu Qiuxiao didn't agree, he could rob it? If Lu Ci didn't want to help him, he could steal it? Thinking of all these things, Jingjiu took a bite of the chilly lake wind and started meditating with his eyes closed. The sky grew dimmer and the time went by. The lake scenery grew darker until the night arrived. Jingjiu stopped breathing and so did his energy. But he didn't have any intention of dying. He was like a rock by the lake. The next morning, the morning sun shone on the surface of the lake, bringing a warm feeling to the lake and preventing the dampness in the wind. A few dewdrops appeared on his perfect face, dripping down slowly until they reached his lips. Jingjiu opened his eyes, waking up like a lotus flower. He looked at the wild lake. After one night's cold intent, the thin ice on the surface of the lake had all frozen into one spot, turning into a bright mirror reflecting the morning sunlight. The booming sounds could be vaguely heard under the layer of ice. It wasn't the roars of the demons in the lake, Nor was it the earthquake. It was the sound made by the layer of ice itself. It was also his intention to come to the cold mountain. Jingjiu had an idea a long time ago, but he hadn't made up his mind yet, which was why he sat by the wild lake all night. The wild lake was frozen after one night. Jingjiu got up and walked to the surface of the ice. A few formidable sword wills came out from his fluttering white cloth. Jingjiu disappeared soundlessly from the surface of the ice and entered the lake, leaving behind a round cave entrance. The lake water rippled in the dark cave, making a pleasant sound. It was believed that the cave would be frozen again at night, so nobody would know that Jingjiu had been here. There were many passageways connected to the underworld on the surface of Chaotian. The most famous one was the huge whirlpool in the deep part of the ocean, and the heavenly well by the East Ocean was the second. There was also a passageway in the cold mountain, which was the Gathered Soul Valley. However, this passageway had been sealed by the important figures of the previous generation of the Zhongzhou school many years ago. Only a few people knew that the wild lake where Jingjiu sat the whole night was connected to a branch of the Gathered Soul Valley. Jingjiu seldom stepped into the human world, so he didn't know about it. However, it was recorded in Taiping Zhenren's notes, so he wanted to try his luck. The underworld was good at controlling the demons, as evidenced by the Dace devil Lu Shui encountered in the Muddy River. Though the passageway to the Gathered Soul Valley was sealed, there should still be some skeletons of the powerful demons left behind after the Great War. The Heavenly Well was called the Heavenly Pit, and the passageway at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley was a crack in the ground, which was as complicated as a spider's web, and it was narrow and difficult to walk through. Entering the crack from the bottom of the lake was a dark world. Even with his sword vision, Jingjiu could only see a distance of 100 feet. Of course, the crack in the ground was full of twists and turns, so he had no chance to see so far. Many dangers were hidden in the crack, like the deviant practitioners, the demons who were good at hiding themselves, and even the demons of the underworld. Not long after entering the crack, Jingjiu sensed many energies. Among those energies hiding in the darkness, some were vigilant and some were ferocious. The only thing they had in common was that they were all powerful. Jingjiu didn't care about them, because in such a dark world, even the most sensitive demons couldn't find him. His hesitation last night was not because he was afraid, but because of something else. After walking along the crack for several hours, Jingjiu came to a relatively spacious underground cave. This underground cave was quite marvelous. There seemed to be some kind of gravitational force in the damp rock walls. Standing in the cave, one couldn't tell the direction of up and down. If one stayed here for too long, he would lose his sense of direction and get lost easily. It would be very difficult for him to walk back to the surface of the earth, and he might even be trapped in the maze-like crack. Jingjiu released his sword awareness and sensed the distant energy in the deep underground. He knew that this was the place. The skeletons of the powerful demons were dozens of miles deep underground. If he walked along the crack, even if he didn't get lost, it would still take him dozens of days. Therefore, he had been thinking of other ways since the beginning. Jingjiu was about to take down the sword of the universe, but he stopped after some thought. He rolled up the sleeve on his right arm and tied it up carefully, exposing his slightly deformed right hand. Jingjiu leaped up into the air, turned his body upside down, and reached out his right hand. His white robe fluttered. Buzz! A gust of wind arose in the underground cave, attracting many demons to peep at him from afar. Jingjiu disappeared. Jingjiu broke through the hard rocks and flew toward the deep underground. He was like a real sword, and his right hand in front of him was the edge of the sword. The stone chips were cut open and shot out. It was easy to imagine the speed at which Jingjiu moved. Strangely enough, the deeper he went, the drier the air became instead of wetter. Even the rocks and sand became much more fluffy. Jingjiu flew faster and faster. Some powerful energies sensed him, but they didn't have enough time to launch an attack. Even if they could, how could they attack Jingjiu, who was hiding in the rocks? After flying for a long time, Jingjiu's right hand bumped into something, giving off a loud boom. Jingjiu was a bit surprised that it could block his right hand. That object must be extremely hard. Could it be the demon bone he was looking for? Jingjiu used his sword awareness to sense the structure of the space outside the rock. With a slight movement of his body, Jingjiu drilled out. He was more than 10 miles deep underground. The air was extremely hot, and the dim lava was flowing slowly about 100 feet away. Jingjiu's right hand had been rubbing against the hard rocks at a high speed for such a long time, so it was extremely hot. Now that it was exposed to the air, it glowed even brighter than the lava. In the dim underground, he was as eye-catching as a firefly in the dark. Jingjiu walked to the object that had been knocked away. It was a magic treasure of a high state, with a strong murderous aura and a bloody aura that made one's Tao heart restless. It was unknown how many innocent creatures had been killed to make it. Jingjiu raised his eyebrows slightly and picked up the magic treasure of the deviant sect. With a sizzling sound, the magic treasure was burned by Jingjiu's right hand, giving off a few puffs of green smoke. It was badly damaged. Hard objects didn't mean that they could withstand high temperatures, such as diamonds. This magic treasure was obviously one of them. Not far away, a voice filled with shock, anger, and absurdity could be heard. Where did this little thief come from? How dare you steal? No. How dare you destroy my magic treasure? Chapter 452. A figure arrived in front of Jingjiu with a whistling wind. The river of lava was a bit dark, but it had a faint glow. Moreover, Jingjiu's right hand was like a burning torch, illuminating the scene in front of him. He was a skinny middle-aged man, his eyes emitting a green glow, his hair disheveled. He looked like a real wild animal, exuding an evil energy as thick as the dark night. This deviant practitioner was very powerful, so he could cultivate so deep in the underground. He must be famous on the cold mountain. Jingjiu glanced at him, and was certain that this person had a higher cultivation state than him. Then, he looked at the magic treasure in his right hand, and was certain that it was hard enough even though it couldn't be burned. A moment later, the magic treasure was burned by Jingjiu's right hand, giving off a wisp of green smoke. The deviant practitioner showed a heartbroken and furious expression on his face, yelling sternly, "You have a death wish." Along with this stern yell, the magic treasure in Jingjiu's hand grew more lethal, and dozens of resentful souls and dark spirits darted toward his face like moths. The temperature in the cave suddenly dropped a bit, and the river of lava grew dimmer. Those resentful souls and dark spirits were shapeless and intangible, and could attack the Tao heart and yuanying of the cultivation practitioners, so they were the most troublesome opponents for the orthodox cultivation practitioners. This deviant practitioner had spent more than 100 years in the Gathered Soul Valley, collecting thousands of resentful souls and dark spirits to temper his life magic treasure into a true demonic weapon. Jingjiu held the magic treasure in his hand, which looked like he was seeking death no matter how one looked at it. Those resentful souls and dark spirits landed on his face like a gust of wind, but they didn't penetrate his face, as if they had bumped into a cliff wall. Instead, they scattered in all directions. Jingjiu didn't intend to let these resentful souls and dark spirits scatter. A bright sword light appeared in his eyes. Crack! Those resentful souls and dark spirits wailed mournfully and turned into countless pieces, falling down to the ground. What came out from his eyes was not a real sword light, but a pure sword will. The more shapeless and intangible an object was, the easier it was to cut it into pieces. Only dozens of resentful souls and apparitions were cut into pieces. Although the evil practitioner was surprised by Jingjiu's sharp sword intent, he did not care. He snorted coldly and prepared to continue attacking. How could Jingjiu give him such a chance? dozens of sword wills spread out from his fingers and slashed around the magic treasure. Then, with a flip of his palm, he kept the magic treasure. The evil cultivator's expression changed abruptly as he noticed that he couldn't sense the existence of his magic treasure any longer, and he couldn't help but be shocked to the extreme. Could it be that she has severed the divine sense connection between me and my magic treasure? But how was that possible? Even the sharpest sword in the world could not do it. The spiritual connection between a cultivation practitioner and his magic treasure was an invisible thread that carried the meaning of cause and effect. It would take a long time for the connection to be erased. It was very difficult to cut it off in such a short time. Neither the sword of the universe nor Jingjiu's right hand before he was injured could do it. In fact, Jingjiu did not use his sword or sword intent to cut the line. He only let his sword intent temporarily entangle the line, and then sent the magic treasure somewhere else. That place was really somewhere else. Not here. Not on the cold mountain. And not even in Chaotian. In a distant, cold, and dark space, there were a few black boxes and a bamboo chair floating in the air. A snow-white beetle was crouching on the bamboo chair. It was none other than Cold Cicada, the head ornament of the principal guard of Aoyama, the master white ghost. Crouching on the bamboo chair, Cold Cicada looked at the distant fireball that was bigger than a star but smaller than the sun, wondering what it was. All of a sudden, a blood-red magic treasure appeared in front of Cold Cicada, blocking the fireball in the distance, exuding a gloomy and dreadful energy. Cold Cicada reached out its thin foot curiously and fiddled with it slightly. The resentful souls and dark spirits in the magic treasure leaped toward Cold Cicada while uttering soundless and dreadful shrieks. Cold Cicada was startled. It rolled down from the high spot and onto the chair. Then, it lay down hastily and pretended to be dead. The claws on its stomach rubbed against each other a few times, releasing something. What Cold Cicada had done was unnecessary. It was because those resentful souls and dark spirits had no way to get close to it. As soon as they left the surface of the magic treasure, they were melted into nothingness by a shapeless force in the dark space. Those resentful souls and dark spirits that hadn't escaped from the magic treasure sensed the instinctive fear in the deepest part of their bodies, so they didn't dare come out. All of them squeezed into the deepest part of the magic treasure. After waiting for a while, Cold Cicada found that nothing had happened. It turned over its body awkwardly and climbed onto the back of the bamboo chair along the armrest. Looking at the resentful souls and dark spirits surging like the tide in the magic treasure, it wondered what they were. The deviant practitioner had a high cultivation state and a wide range of knowledge. Soon, he figured out that Jingjiu didn't cut off the connection between him and the magic treasure of his life, but sent the magic treasure to a place where his spiritual awareness couldn't reach. According to the knowledge of the cultivation circle, there was only one place that was both close and far away at the same time, and that was the small space created by the spatial magic treasure. Who was this person? How could he possess such a rare magic treasure as the spatial magic treasure? The deviant practitioner tried his best to suppress the shock in his mind, as he tried to figure out Jingjiu's identity, wondering if this person was an elder of a famous and large sect. The Zen sects were good at using the mustard seed magic, but he didn't think Jingjiu was an eminent monk of the Zen sections. The reason was simple. It was because Jingjiu had hair, and he didn't think Jingjiu was the disciple of the Guoqing temple who experienced the mortal world. How could he avoid the mortal world with such a face? Jingjiu moved slightly and arrived at a place 100 feet away. It seemed that he was about to leave after taking the magic treasure. Under normal circumstances, the deviant practitioner would let go of the highly achieved swordsmen of the orthodox sects even if their cultivation states were lower than his. But his magic treasure of life was in Jingjiu's hands at the moment, and if he could seize the spatial magic treasure, he would even try to kill the elder of the mysterious dark church. To say nothing of the highly achieved swordsmen of the orthodox sections, a chilly wind suddenly rose, and the deviant practitioner turned into a wisp of black smoke whizzing toward Jingjiu. Jingjiu's clothes fluttered in the wind. He lightly touched the surface of the lava river, and then flew into the distance, as if he wanted to stop the deviant practitioner's pursuit with the high temperature of the lava. The deviant practitioner sneered silently, thinking that he had lived beside the underground lava river for more than 100 years, and it was wishful thinking to use this method to deal with him. With a slight change of his mind, he activated the tactical formation hidden around the cave. With a boom, the cliff above the cave suddenly collapsed, pressing Jingjiu into the lava river. The lava river looked dim, but in fact it was extremely hot. With a sizzling sound, a ball of flame appeared at the place where Jingjiu disappeared. It was strange that Jingjiu, who had mastered the Netherworld fairy sword, would move so slowly, and why didn't he directly use his right hand to break the ground and leave as he did before? The deviant practitioner glided to the bank of the lava river. Looking at the disappearing ball of flame, he didn't show any happiness on his face, but a hint of worry. He wasn't worried that killing this person would draw the revenge of those orthodox sections. This was the cold mountain, a few miles under the ground. Who would know that he was the one who killed this person? More importantly, that person had been swallowed by the hot lava, and his corpse must have been destroyed. What if his spatial magic treasure was also damaged? The deviant practitioner waved his sleeve, and a shapeless force came out from nowhere, splitting a gap in the lava river, exposing the bright and scarlet liquid inside. Boom! The bright and scarlet lava suddenly exploded, as if a huge beast had been pierced through, the fresh blood gushing out violently. A great amount of hot and deadly lava shot toward the deviant practitioner, looking like a dreadful fire waterfall. The deviant practitioner had been hiding by the lava river for more than 100 years, so he wouldn't be burned to death so easily. With a grave expression on his face, he took out another magic treasure. The hot red lava was blocked in front of him, looking like a red jade wall. The red jade wall was translucent, and a black figure suddenly appeared inside it. Jingjiu broke through the wall and charged at the deviant practitioner with a great deal of lava and a bright light. A hint of surprise and lethal intent flashed in the deviant practitioner's eyes. With a shrill shriek, he slapped at Jingjiu's head with his hands along with the gloomy and cold black smoke. Pa! The two hands of the deviant practitioner were accurately grabbed by Jingjiu. Jingjiu wielded his sword as soon as he struck. Even though his cultivation state was not high enough, it was hard to find someone in Chaotian who could wield the sword faster and more accurately than him. The deviant practitioner could sense a distinct pain coming from his wrist. It was his wrist that Jingjiu had grabbed. There was a visible wound on his wrist, and it was bleeding profusely. In particular, his left hand, which was held by Jingjiu's right hand, was visible to the naked eye, and was on the verge of breaking. The deviant practitioner's eyes were full of shock and bewilderment, but he still didn't think he would die. In his eyes, Jingjiu's cultivation state was far inferior to his, so it was useless even if Jingjiu had a magic treasure that could repel the fire. Enduring the pain in his wrist, he yelled sternly while staring into Jingjiu's eyes. Go-to more gloomy and cold black smoke came out from his hands along with this stern yell, and it seemed that Jingjiu would be swallowed by it. Suddenly, his voice stopped abruptly. The black smoke vanished without a trace. Thud! A sword blade suddenly came out from the deviant practitioner's throat. Even though the sword was stained with blood, it still gave off a lonely and cold feeling. Jingjiu looked at the deviant practitioner in silence, his face devoid of any expression. The deviant practitioner's expression didn't change either. He still thought he wouldn't lose at the moment. It was a rare opportunity for him to strike, but he pierced his throat with a sword. Did he think he could kill a cultivation practitioner this way? Did he think this was a fight between mortals? It seemed that this person should be an elder of a big sect who had been cultivating in seclusion for many years and rarely came out to travel. It was rare for him to come out, and he had precious spatial magic treasures and fire-taming beads with him. His cultivation state wasn't weak, but he had no fighting experience. He should really die. Thinking of these things, the deviant practitioner was about to spit out the demon infant. The demon infant was right in front of him. The demon infant could easily enter the opponent's body and swallow the opponent's yuanying or sword ghost. But the next moment, he found something was wrong. The demon infant didn't enter his mouth. The demon infant might not even have heard his order. Then, he found that he had lost all feeling in his body. For a cultivator, it was not a fatal injury to be pierced through the throat by a sword. The problem was that the sword was very wide, so wide that one could sit on it without feeling uncomfortable. It was even wide enough for two people to sit on it. If the two people were in the mood, they could even play a game of chess on it. The sword of the universe was such a sword. Though the unicorn had knocked off the sword in the Guoqing temple, and its shape was not as exaggerated as it had been, it was still very wide. At least, it was much wider than a person's neck. Therefore, when the sword of the universe pierced through a person's throat, it meant that the person's head had been chopped off. At this moment, the sword of the universe was pierced through the deviant practitioner's neck. The surface of the sword completely separated the head from the body. It didn't look like a flying sword at all, but more like a big piece of iron used to cut a person's body in a magic trick. The deviant practitioner's head fell to the ground, with a frightened and perplexed expression on his face. His body also fell to the ground. The ground was filled with lava that had come ashore, emitting a suffocating heat. Even the most powerful cultivators couldn't survive in the lava unless they were in the heavenly arrival state. After all, not everybody was as special as Jingjiu. But he didn't stop. Who knew if this deviant practitioner had learned any tricks to deal with the lava after hiding by the river of lava for so many years? The sword of the universe hacked down again. At the same time, Jingjiu pointed at the air with his right hand. The sword wills swept across the underground cave. The deviant practitioner's head and body were chopped into countless pieces before they fell to the ground. The demon infant, the demon wheel, and the demon fetus were all chopped into pieces. Then, Jingjiu flicked his sleeve and sent them into the slowly flowing lava river. Hundreds of tiny flames emerged on the surface of the lava river. Chapter 453. The Great Way Toward Heaven has no updates today. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 454. I've corrected all the typos in the previous chapters. If you see any typos, please remind me in this chapter. You should have seen it. I'll read every sentence in this chapter. Hundreds of flames disappeared gradually, like sparks dispersing in the wind. That deviant practitioner should be a famous figure. He had been hiding at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley for many years, collecting souls to refine weapons. He must have had a big plan. When he returned to the surface of the earth, he would probably cause a lot of trouble. But he was killed by Jingjiu's sword in such a way, without causing any trouble. He didn't even leave his name. Thinking of this, people couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Looking at the scene in the lava river, Jingjiu closed his eyes and remained silent for a long time. He didn't sigh with emotion. He didn't have any unnecessary or even harmful emotions to strangers. He was just adjusting his breath to recover his sword source. It seemed easy to kill that swordsman, but it was actually quite difficult. That swordsman had a high state and excellent demonic skills. He also had a deep understanding of the underground cave and the lava river. Even an elder in the broken sea state of the Aoyama sect couldn't kill him easily here. Jingjiu was in the middle state of the free travel. Even if his real fighting capacity was more than that, it was still very difficult for him to kill this deviant practitioner, which consumed a lot of his energy. That energy was not the fighting intent, but the nutrition for his deduction and calculation. When he picked up the magic treasure, the deviant practitioner hadn't shown up yet. So he did two things. He let the sword of the universe go to the far side of the river quietly and waited there. Meanwhile, he put the cloth wrapping the sword of the universe into his left hand. That cloth played an important role in the subsequent fight. It was burned into a flame by the lava in the river. If he wanted to kill an opponent whose cultivation was far above his own, he couldn't afford to make any mistakes in the slightest. Seeing the flame caused by the cloth, the deviant practitioner thought he was burning in the lava, so he couldn't help but relax. No practitioner could survive in the lava, except for those in the reaching heaven state or those who had rare treasures. The deviant practitioner didn't expect that Jingjiu was still alive and could raise a waterfall like lava to attack him. He also didn't expect that a wide flying sword of the fairy state had been waiting for him in the darkness behind him. Under such circumstances, how could he not die? To be precise, that evil cultivator wasn't killed by Jingjiu's sword, but by Jingjiu's calculation. Jingjiu had calculated all the directions of this battle. Of course, those calculations were not necessarily based on strength, because the thoughts and responses of evil practitioners could change at any time. However, the overall framework had been determined, and some details could not change the final outcome. This was the true way of the sword in Aoyama. Taiping was naturally very good at this, and so was he. Since he was in the small village, Jingjiu had shown that he didn't know much about the affairs of the world, and he had a bad memory. In fact, the affairs of the world had no meaning for him, but it was different when it came to cultivation or sword work. The lava river flowed slowly. There was no sound of waves, only the deep sound of friction between the lava and the riverbank. Jingjiu opened his eyes and looked at the river. The surface of the river was next to the air, and the temperature gradually dropped, returning to its gloomy appearance. That evil cultivator should be dead. He took out the magic treasure and looked at it. His expression changed slightly. The body of this magic treasure was a scale, but he didn't know what kind of creature it was. Judging from its weight and size, that creature should be big, but it was not as big as the Tsang dragon, or even smaller than the Dace devil. The level of a creature was not absolutely related to its size. Otherwise, his friend in the distant sea should be the strongest in this world. Well, it was indeed difficult for the giant to find an opponent. Using his sword awareness, Jingjiu sensed the extremely pure fire will in this magic treasure, which was obviously extraordinary. The original owner was very likely to be a fire dragon living in the underground magma or some other kind of strange monster. But it was a pity that when the scale fell off, the original owner was not mature yet, and the true nature of the scale did not exist. It was barely turned into a magic treasure after years of hard work by the evil cultivator. The scale contained such a pure fire will, so it should be able to control fire. The reason that the evil cultivator had burned the scale with his right hand was that the evil cultivator had forcibly poured a lot of resentful souls and nether spirits into the scale, which destroyed the nature of the scale. Jingjiu shook his head, thinking that the evil cultivator was not good at forging magic treasures, and it was a pity that such a good material was wasted. He didn't feel too regretful, because he had seen too many good materials and magic treasures like this one. And he wanted this magic treasure because it was hard enough to be used as a whetstone for his sword. Now that it was used as a whetstone, the magic treasure would turn into powder in the end, so there was no need to waste it. The river of magma flowed slowly. Once in a while, the surface of the river would be torn apart, emitting a wall-like red glow, illuminating the dark and gloomy bottom of the cave. The low screeching and occasional flames had no effect on Jingjiu. Sitting by the river, he rubbed his right hand on the magic treasure, his expression focused. He adjusted the angle and strength of his hand from time to time as the magic treasure was worn down. This magic treasure made of the scale was indeed very hard, and it was not just hard, like the remains of that large demon in the fiend prison. It felt nice to touch and was as smooth as jade, but it was a bit brittle. A few days later, the magic treasure broke into tiny pieces along with a few cracking sounds. Countless resentful souls and dark spirits came out from the magic treasure, bringing along a gust of gloomy wind. Normally, after the magic treasure was broken, nothing could control these resentful souls and dark spirits, so they should flee instinctively and head to the ground or the deeper parts of the cave through the cracks in the ground in search of blood and soul food. However, these resentful souls and dark spirits had witnessed Jingjiu sharpening the magic treasures for a few days, and they felt a deeper fear instinctively. They didn't dare leave Jingjiu's side, drifting around him. If someone saw this scene, they would think Jingjiu was a deviant cultivator who harmed the innocent lives to forge the magic treasure. Did he recognize the magic treasure as its master? If it were the main characters in other stories, they would keep these resentful souls and dark spirits by their side and figure out how to deal with them in order to obtain the most benefit. Yet, Jingjiu didn't want to pay any attention to them, and was about to leave. It was then that he suddenly recalled a past event. 300 years ago, the monster invasion of the Snowy Kingdom came southward again. All the swordsmen of the human race went to the rescue. Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing led the swordsmen of the peaks to the Lanling snowland, leaving only a few young disciples in Aoyama. The underworld master and his subordinates took the opportunity to sneak to the Shinma Peak through the great formation of Aoyama in an attempt to take back the seal of the king of the underworld, but Jingjiu slashed the seal in half. All the swordsmen of the underworld were killed, save for the underworld master. After Lu Xi came back, he advised Jingjiu to dispose of the corpses, but Jingjiu refused because he was too lazy to do so. Afterwards, the soul fires left by the swordsmen of the underworld drifted in the Shinma Peak for many years and turned into the resentful souls in the end. Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to them. Anyway, those resentful souls couldn't affect him, and they couldn't frighten those juniors who were qualified to go to the Shinma Peak to visit him. A few hundred years later, Jingjiu climbed the Shinma Peak with Zhao Liu in his hand, and encountered those resentful souls again. This indicated that Jingjiu shouldn't slack off now that the matter had something to do with him. Even if he could slack off for a moment, he would have to do it himself 300 years later. If he didn't pay attention to those resentful souls and dark spirits drifting around him right now, it would be his business many years later. Jingjiu had figured it out. He shook his head and wielded the sword of the universe. Those dark spirits were crushed into the tiniest dust particles as soon as they touched the desolate sword will, returning to their original state. Yet, those resentful souls didn't disperse right away. The sword of the universe brought up a great amount of hot lava from the river, forming hundreds of blurry words. It seemed to be a script from the Guoqing temple if one looked closely. The flames illuminated the gloomy cave and the faces of those resentful souls. The faces of those resentful souls had gradually become blurry, and the evil energy had gradually disappeared. In the end, they turned into green glows and vanished. Regardless of whether they were the dark spirits or the resentful souls, they couldn't launch a formidable attack like the tide without the help of a magic treasure. Moreover, Jingjiu wasn't afraid of the evil in nature, so he could slay them easily with one swing of his sword. But in fact, this sword move wasn't simple at all. It was extremely complicated, even close to perfection. Nobody could use this sword move except for Jingjiu. Even Jingjiu himself couldn't do it if he hadn't listened to the Buddhist scripts for 6 years in the Guoqing temple. Jingjiu threw the broken pieces of the magic treasure into the river, and then leapt up into the air. He didn't intend to leave. Countless demon bones in the ancient battlefield were waiting for him down there. Thinking of this, even he felt a bit expectant. Jingjiu turned his body upside down and reached out his right hand. There was a slight buzzing sound. A gust of wind rose in the gloomy cave. Jingjiu disappeared. A perfectly round hole appeared on the ground. The hot lava gushed into the hole from the cracks of the rocks below, filling up the hole again. Then, the hole faded away, leaving no trace behind. The melting of the rocks and forming a river indicated that he had entered the center of the earth. It was hard for the human cultivation practitioners to live in such a scorching environment, regardless of whether they were of the orthodox or deviant sections. Jingjiu didn't run into any more hidden swordsmen. He didn't know whether he was lucky or unlucky. After an unknown amount of time, he broke through the rock wall and flew out. This was an extremely large underground cavern. The cavern ceiling and the ground were several hundred zhang high, and it seemed very spacious. A river of hot magma flowed continuously on the ground. If not for the fact that the lava was so hot and bright, and the rumbling sounds it made when it hit the riverbank, he would have thought that he was still at the previous river. It was impossible for a person to step into two identical rivers, but after going around in circles, there would always be similar scenery. He landed on the riverbank and looked into the distance. The bright and hot river of fire stretched for more than 10 li into the distance. Then, at a certain place, it suddenly diverged and became two rivers. It wasn't one river going east and one river going west, but one river going up and one river going down. Some people, after experiencing such a thing and seeing such a scene, might feel a bit emotional. But Jingjiu didn't. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to tell. The river continuously spewed flames and even more terrifying lava, illuminating his expressionless face. In the next moment, he turned around and walked up the gentle slope. He felt the breath in front of him getting clearer and clearer, and he knew that he was in the right place. Countless years ago, the gentle slope was an ancient battlefield where the human race and the underworld fought. After the Gathered Soul Valley was sealed by Zhongzhou School, the ancient battlefield sank to the deepest part of the earth. It seemed to be something that happened 30,000 years ago. Zhongzhou School had just been established and was in its first heyday, but he wasn't sure. After so many years, the remains of the swordsmen of the human race must have been transported away and buried peacefully. The bodies of the swordsmen of the underworld were also gone. It was wishful thinking to think that he could find the magic treasures and secret manuals left by the swordsmen here. But what he was looking for were the bones of the demon beast. No matter how greedy the cultivation sects of the human race were, they would skin the beasts and take the pills. Presumably, they had no interest in those heavy and huge bones. Those demon bones were useless except for being hard. They were also meaningless for cultivators to use as tea. It was just right for him to use. With this thought, Jingjiu came to the highest point of the gentle slope and looked down. The cave on this side was even bigger. The ground was a black field, about 10 miles in circumference. The firelight from the river illuminated the cave and sprinkled on the field, like the sunset glow. Hundreds of huge demon bones were scattered on the field under the sunset glow, casting an even bigger shadow. These dead demon beasts still had the same appearance when they died in the battle, still as huge and terrifying as before. This ancient battlefield didn't seem to have been through tens of thousands of years, but it still gave people a feeling of vicissitude. Jingjiu came to the white skeleton of a big demon. Judging from the appearance of the skeleton, this big demon looked like an ordinary elephant, but it was more than 10 times bigger. What interested Jingjiu the most was the tusk of this big demon. He reached out his left hand, but touched nothing. The huge tusk, about 100 feet long, broke into pieces and turned into snowflakes, sprinkling all over his body and face. Then, the skeleton of the big demon fell apart like a straw hut in a gust of wind. It collapsed on the ground and also turned into powder. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu walked to the skeleton of another big demon and reached out his left little finger. The same thing happened again. The skeleton of the big demon fell apart, turning into the eye-catching white powder on the black field. Tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything had decayed. The demon bone in the fiend prison had been soaked in the stomach of the old dragon for many years, and was ground into powder by Jingjiu's right hand from summer to early autumn. Yet, the bones of the big demons in the field collapsed when they touched the powder. Tens of thousands of years had passed, and it had shown its power in a place where one couldn't see it. The power of time was indeed the sharpest sword in heaven and earth. Standing among hundreds of huge skeletons, Jingjiu fell silent for a while, and then turned around to leave. As he left, his cloth ruffled in the wind. It was unclear whether he did it intentionally or unintentionally. Hundreds of huge skeletons collapsed slowly. It was believed that they would merge into the black field in a few years. Jingjiu didn't turn his head around to take a look. He walked toward the source of the sunset glow, and sat down by the river. The lava in the river was jumping up and down, like an upside-down waterfall, or like a joyful creature. The booming sounds could be heard incessantly. The river flowed forward. Time passed quickly. One shouldn't give up day and night. Yet, there was no need to be reluctant to give up when there was a chance. Jingjiu thought about it calmly. Chapter 455. One should strive for the day and night rather than the day and night. In this way, the ages would be longer. Normally, Jingjiu should leave after he had thought of this, but he didn't get up. He was still sitting by the river in a daze. He left Aoyama to look for the whetstones, but the demon bones in the fiend prison were gone, and the demon bones at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley had all turned to dust. Where should he go? He was still the same person who didn't care about the affairs of the mortal world, but he had changed in some minor aspects. For instance, he would leave Aoyama once in a while, and he would often be accompanied by others when he traveled, including Gu Qing, Guodong, and Zhao Lei. But he was not used to being alone at the moment, and he felt bored. He didn't take out the bamboo chair. It would be a pity if the temperature of the river of lava was too high, and the lava could splash out at any moment. It would be a pity if the bamboo chair was burned down. He didn't take out the ceramic plate either. It was unclear when he had stopped playing the game of piling up the sand. He suddenly stood up and put away the white cloth, and walked toward the lava. The sword of the universe followed him in silence. He didn't decide to jump into the river to commit suicide and burn himself to death after being shocked by the passage of tens of thousands of years. All he wanted to do was take a bath. The red lava looked like the golden water. Jingjiu scooped it up from the river and poured it on his face, and then dripped it down his body, creating hundreds of sparks on the surface of the river. Except for the chaotic fire produced by the Tao cauldrons and the magic treasures of the fairy state, no other fire could hurt him, including the scorching and dreadful lava. The temperature of the lava was extremely high. He could feel the scalding heat even with his eyes closed. His body felt a slight pain, which was rare for him, followed by a comfortable sensation. The steam bath was meaningless to him, and neither was the massage. Unexpectedly, he found a similar pleasure in the river of lava under the ground that day. Jingjiu felt quite comfortable. He lay down in the lava and supported the back of his head with his hands, looking at the pattern of the sunset on the stone wall on the top of the cave in a daze. Actually, many cultivators did not understand that there was actually no unbreakable connection between ascension and longevity. Ascension didn't mean longevity. Those immortals of the previous generations who had left Chaotian had probably died a long time ago. Ascension was not necessary to achieve longevity. According to Jingjiu's observation, the round turtle on the top of Tianguang Peak could live for tens of thousands of years, or even longer. Longevity was for the sake of living. Ascension was for the sake of getting out. Living and going out were all for the sake of finding new pleasures. This kind of pleasure included, but was not limited to, the enjoyment of life instincts. More importantly, it referred to discovering knowledge that one did not understand, laws that one had not come into contact with, and unknown worlds that one had not imagined. Therefore, bathing in magma and soaking in magma like a hot spring was naturally one of them. According to Jingjiu's way of doing things, even if he occasionally had fun in this aspect, he wouldn't stay in it for too long. This was because this kind of novel experience could still be calculated, and it was within expectations. Today, he lay in the lava for a long time. Before entering the underground, he sat by the wild lake for an entire night. When he was at the heavenly well by the East Sea, he looked down for a long time. It was all because of hesitation. Before he left, he had already calculated that it would be difficult to find a suitable demon bone at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley. It might even be dangerous, but he still came. This was because this place was very close to the abyss, and over there was the netherworld. He didn't want to go to the snowland because it was dangerous there. He didn't want to go to the netherworld because it was also very dangerous there. Logically speaking, he shouldn't have hesitated at all. He should have just turned around and left. Why was he lying in the magma and staring blankly at the sunset? Very few people knew what Jingjiu liked. Lu Shisui only knew that he liked to lie on the bamboo chair. Therefore, whether in Tianguang Peak or in the Guoqing Temple, he didn't forget to plant a few bamboos so that it would be convenient to repair the bamboo chair. Gu Qing only knew that he liked to watch the snow. Therefore, every year when it snowed, he and Yuan Chu would move out of the Taoist temple and leave the good seat by the window for his master. Zhao Liu only knew that he liked to keep his long black and smooth hair. Therefore, she didn't want that, but she still insisted that he comb her hair. But even the three of them didn't know what Jingjiu really disliked. There were many things he didn't want to do. It was because he was lazy or he thought it was meaningless, but it didn't mean he didn't like it. For instance, he didn't like eating hot pot because he thought it was meaningless, but it didn't mean he didn't like hot pot. Back when he was on the Shangda Peak, he liked to sit by and watch his big brother and Yuan and Lu eat hot pot. This habit had persisted until now. Right now, he liked to watch Zhao Liu eat hot pot very much. In countless restaurants in Chaotian, there were white soups that had been eaten by him. Guodong was the only one who knew the answer. The thing Jingjiu disliked the most was to owe others. No matter it was love, money, or other things. After he had vanished into thin air in the distant outside world, there was still a murky energy left in his body. It was the unfinished cause and effect and the unfinished fate. It was because of this that he had failed in ascension, so it was natural that he disliked it. Since his rebirth, he had paid more attention to this aspect. He had tried to make up for the debts he owed in the past, but some new debts had arisen. His biggest creditor was the king of the underworld. In the fiend prison, the king of the underworld taught him the control of soulfire, and he promised to help the king of the underworld find a successor and pass on the seal of the king of the underworld and the control of soulfire to that successor. 13 years had passed, but he hadn't finished the task yet. He put the sword of the universe into the universe and sank into the bottom of the lava with his eyes closed. The density of the lava was very high. If a regular person didn't burn to ashes, they wouldn't be able to sink into the lava. But Jingjiu was different. He flowed along the river of lava to the distance like a rock. The river forked a few miles away. One river went up and the other went down. The river would make its own choice by going with the flow. Was he going with the flow irresponsibly? Or was he going with the flow as the monks of the Guoqing temple liked to say? Or was he just being lazy? Perhaps even Jingjiu didn't know the answer himself. All he could sense was that as he sank deeper and deeper into the lava, the temperature around him grew higher, and his right hand grew a bit softer. This was what he wanted. He had drifted along the river of lava for a long time. One day, he suddenly bumped into something. As he opened his eyes, he found that the thing blocking his way was a wall. This wall was transparent. The river of lava couldn't move forward after encountering the wall. The river of lava rolled back, forming countless small whirlpools and generating innumerable flames, looking like thousands of holes in a stove. If he were back on the ground, he could only see the sky, but not the wall. So he was in the underground. Jingjiu walked to the front of the transparent wall with his hands folded behind his back, looking at the distance. This wall was very high, stretching for a great many miles. It was impossible to see its end. On the other side was the dark and gloomy abyss. On the other side of the abyss was the underworld. To become the leader of the orthodox human cultivation sects, being powerful was a must, but it was not the only requirement. One had to shoulder many responsibilities for the human race and pay a great price, like guarding the passage between the human world and the underworld. Those famous cultivation sects with a long history in Chaotian all had their own passageways guarded by them. The No Mercy sect guarded the passage at the bottom of the Longevity Mountain. The Heavenly Well by the East Ocean was guarded by Shuiyu Nunnery and the Guoqing Temple together, and Yamatsai guarded the 1,000-mile wind corridor. The Zhongzhou school had the highest status and the strongest prowess, so it had the greatest responsibility. The old dragon turned into the fiend prison to guard Zhaoga City, and he was also responsible for the passage at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley. This huge transparent wall stretching for a great many miles should be the seal of the Zhongzhou school. Judging from the energy it exuded, it was indeed very powerful and indestructible. The Aoyama sect didn't guard the passage to the underworld. It was because the water in the south was abundant and the cracks in the underground were filled up, but they paid a great price as well. If the Zhongzhou school paid the price of the powerful magic treasures and formations needed to trap and seal the divine animals, the Aoyama sect paid the price of the swords and blood. Jingjiu stood in front of the huge transparent wall with his hands folded behind his back, gazing at the abyss on the other side in silence. 13 years ago, the king of the underworld also gazed at the abyss on the other side in silence through a transparent and unbreakable barrier. At the time, the king of the underworld's gaze was full of nostalgia for his hometown, but the expression in Jingjiu's eyes was much more complicated at the moment. His gaze passed through the abyss and landed on the distant underworld. The topography and the sky in the underworld were similar to this side. There were also steep mountain peaks, but there was no sun, so the sunlight was extremely dim. The underground fire was the only source of illumination. A slightly brighter river meandered among the mountains, bringing light and hope to the lives on the banks of the river. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and looked at his right hand. His right hand had become a bit softer after soaking in the river of lava for a long time. Jingjiu had kept his hands folded behind his back, but he was actually kneading the index finger of his right hand with his left hand. The index finger didn't seem to have changed much, but it was actually sharper, and it had almost recovered to its original state. Jingjiu reached out his index finger and pointed at the huge transparent wall in front of him. The transparent wall didn't seem to have any thickness or elasticity. It sounded normal, but if one thought about it carefully, it would be a very frightening thing. It could even be said to be unimaginable. It was unknown what formation the immortals of the previous generation had used when the Zhongzhou school sealed this place 30,000 years ago, and how many magic treasures had been consumed. With a soft sound, Jingjiu's fingertip fell on the transparent wall. Feeling the feedback from his fingertip, he raised his eyebrows, and the sword wills all over his body suddenly erupted. Thousands of extremely fine and sharp sword intents emitted from his body. They were like willow leaves blown by the wind, swirling in all directions. A few black stones under his feet were cut into pieces, and innumerable cracks appeared on the surface of the lava in the river, which couldn't be mended. He didn't enter such a state even when he faced the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect in the Guoqing temple. And when Monk Duhai launched a sneak attack, he was affected by the fairy book. Since his rebirth, this was the first time that he had revealed his most powerful appearance. In an instant, His face turned extremely pale. Another soft sound rang out. His fingertips seemed to have pierced into the transparent wall, but it also seemed that nothing had happened. If one looked at it with the naked eye, one wouldn't be able to see any change even if he put his fingertip close to it. Jingju felt a bit tired. It seemed that he had used up all of his sword's source by piercing his finger. He sat down cross-legged and started cultivating with his eyes closed. The huge transparent wall in front of him displayed the abyss and the distant underworld clearly, like a huge painting, waiting for him to appreciate it when he woke up. 30 seconds later, the river of lava suddenly grew lighter. A shadow came out from nowhere and landed on Jingju's body. Jingju opened his eyes and looked at the other side of the huge transparent wall. The shadow had a gloomy and eerie aura, which was not unfamiliar to him. It was the projection of an important figure of the underworld. If the underworld wished to influence Chaotian, they had to resort to this method most of the time. Back when the elder Wei Qinzi of the Zhongzhou school in the Yuanying state failed to assassinate Zhao Liu, he was killed by the shadow of the third disciple of the underworld master while fleeing. The disciple of Aoyama, Jian Ruoshan, was also killed in the same way in the ruined temple outside Jianli City when he investigated the murder of Zhuo Yi in private. This important figure of the underworld was very powerful, and his cultivation state was much higher than the current Jingjiu. It was believed that it wouldn't be difficult for his shadow to kill Jingjiu. Yet, no fear could be seen on Jingjiu's face, not even a hint of caution. He had anticipated that the other party would show up. It was because he was the one who called the other party here. "Who are you?" It was unclear when a person had appeared on the other side of the huge transparent wall. The person narrowed his eyes, and the colorful glows flowed on his face without eyebrows, but they couldn't outshine his clothes. He wore a bright blue cloth, which was quite eye-catching against the background of black and white and the faint glow of the fire. There was no blue sky or green fields in the underworld, only dull colors of black, white, and gray. The commoners usually wore the same colors, and only the nobles with a high status were qualified to wear colorful clothes. Back in the Fiend prison, when Jingjiu met the king of the underworld for the first time, the king of the underworld wore colorful clothes. The color of this person's clothes was so eye-catching that he must have a very high status in the underworld. After receiving the message from Jingjiu, this person could pass through the abyss and arrive here in just 1 minute. His speed was truly amazing. He had indeed grown stronger after 300 years. Thinking of this, Jingjiu felt sentimental. The person's expression was grave, and he exuded a powerful energy. Like most of the people in the underworld, he was very short, about 4 feet tall. Yet, as his energy exuded, he gave off a feeling that he was extremely tall, as if this huge transparent wall couldn't even stop him. Few people in all of Chaotian had such a powerful energy. He was probably in the same state as Lu Ci. Jingjiu said, "Now that you know the origin of the mosquitoes, you should have guessed who I am. I don't believe that Taiping didn't tell you what had happened in the Fiend prison." That person looked at Jingjiu in silence and asked, "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the holder of the seal," replied Jingjiu. "The mosquitoes." "The seal." After a long pause, the person asked, "Is the emperor still alive?" Jingjiu shook his head. The person pressed, "If the emperor is dead, why is his soul fire in the mosquitoes?" Jingjiu said, "As I said, you should know that I was by his side before he died." Looking at the quiet underworld river at the bottom of the abyss, the person fell silent again for a long time before saying, "Hand over the seal of the king of the underworld, and I won't kill you today." "Do you think I should be afraid of you?" asked Jingjiu. The person lifted his head and stared into Jingjiu's eyes, asking emotionlessly, "Do you know who I am?" Jingjiu said, "Of course I know you are the underworld master. I also know something else. Do you want to hear it? For instance, you were almost hacked to death by someone with a sword 300 years ago. It was true that this person in blue clothing with a profound energy of the same level as Lu Xi was the strongest swordsman of the underworld. Looking at Jingjiu in silence, he suddenly asked, "What do you want?" Jingjiu said, "That mosquito has the soul fire of the king of the underworld, which is enough to prove your legitimacy, and it can help you settle the disputes of the underworld. You should choose a suitable successor to the throne as soon as possible and bring him to the human world for me to have a look." The underworld master narrowed his eyes even more as he exclaimed, "Do you know what you are talking about?" Jingjiu said, "This is what the king of the underworld told me before his death." The underworld master said expressionlessly, "The emperor went to the human world back then and didn't come back. Do you think it will happen again?" Jingjiu said, "If the new emperor isn't approved by me, the seal of the king of the underworld won't come back to the underworld." The underworld master said, "If this is the case, our underworld is indebted to you, but what do you want?" It was the same question as before. Jingjiu asked the underworld master, "Have you ever considered joining hands with Aoyama to get rid of Taiping?" "Do you know what you are talking about?" asked the underworld master with a small smile. Jingjiu said, "Like I said, I know many other things. For instance, you are the personal disciple of Taiping in the underworld." Hearing this, the expression on the underworld master's face changed slightly. Jingjiu continued, "According to the age of entering the underworld, you should be after Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing, so you are the third person." The underworld master narrowed his eyes into a line as he exclaimed, "Now that you know the relationship between me and the immortal, why do you still want to persuade me to join hands with Aoyama?" Jingjiu said calmly, "I'm good at persuading his disciples to betray him." End of this chapter. Chapter 456. The underworld master didn't respond. He didn't agree to the request while looking at Jingjiu's face thoughtfully, and he didn't spit in the abyss. The wild grass will start a prairie fire when it is set ablaze. When the mortals in the human world die out, it will be the underworld's turn. Jingjiu asked, "Doesn't Taiping's ambition make you feel uneasy? You can talk without clothes, and you can pass through such a hot river of lava. I'm really curious how shameless you are." Looking at his lower body, the underworld master said seriously, "I'm uneasy that the seal of the king of the underworld is in the hands of someone like you." Jingjiu remembered by now that he had taken off his clothes before he entered the river of lava to prevent his white cloth from being damaged after being soaked in the lava for a long time. His appearance was exactly what he looked like at the moment. Then he remembered that he wasn't wearing any clothes when he met the king of the underworld in the fiend prison for the first time. He was indeed at odds with the underworld. It seemed to be the right choice to let the underworld master bring him up instead of going down to the underworld himself. Thinking of all this, Jingjiu didn't intend to take out his clothes and put them on. Since this state made the underworld master feel uneasy, Jingjiu wanted to convince him that it was better to maintain this state. It was then that he suddenly felt a tremor under his feet. He turned around and looked at the upstream of the lava river. Countless waves suddenly formed in the lava river, rushing toward the huge transparent wall from the distance with loud roars. A huge wave like a long dam could be vaguely seen in the distance. The water level of the river rose abruptly, and soon it reached his feet, and then it kept rising. The lava slapped against the cliff walls madly, causing thousands of fires. Jingjiu leapt up in the air. Looking down at the terrifying waves of lava and fire, he wondered what had happened. He could vaguely hear an angry roar, but it wasn't the sound of the river. Then he sensed a powerful spiritual awareness pressing down on him. The underworld master had also heard the roar and sensed the energy. The expression on his face changed slightly, wondering why the King of Fire had woken up. The transparent giant wall separated the human world from the netherworld. Even powerful beings in the reaching heaven state would have a hard time passing through it. Besides, with his cultivation, He didn't need to be afraid of his opponent at all. However, he was a little surprised. That little guy was used to sleeping in the magma. Why had he suddenly woken up and behaved so angrily? The underworld master said to Jingjiu, "I'll consider your matter carefully. You wait for the news by the heavenly well on the day of the winter solstice 10 years later." Jingjiu asked, "Are you in a hurry?" In his mind, if the underworld master didn't want to face the owner of the energy, he should leave as soon as possible. The underworld master said with a faint smile, "If he saw us together, the Zhongzhou school would accuse you of colluding with the underworld. I'm doing this for your sake." After saying this, he put his hands behind his back and floated away like a child, quickly disappearing into the abyss. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and turned to look at the upstream of the river of magma, thinking that if the owner of the energy had something to do with the Zhongzhou school, it should be the follow-up to the event of the Gathered Soul Valley being sealed off. But why hadn't he heard of it before, not even recorded in the notes of his big brother? The energy was getting closer and closer. A huge wave as large as a dam came along. Soon, the huge wave arrived at his feet, crashing toward the transparent giant wall. There was a loud bang. The cliff cave shook violently, and a great many rocks fell down. The fiery magma shot up into the sky and pulled Jingjiu into the river. The instant he fell into the river, he saw a scene. A golden carp leapt up from the violent river of magma. He swung his body, tore down the shadows on the cliff wall, and swallowed them. They were the projections left by the underworld master in the human world. He didn't retrieve them before he left, leaving them for this golden carp to eat. This was also the question he left for Jingjiu. If he couldn't answer it well, he would be killed. How could Jingjiu convince the golden carp that he didn't collude with the underworld and merely wanted to persuade the underworld master to cooperate with him? Nobody would believe such an absurd thing. In fact, this kind of thing had only happened once in the history of Taipingzhenren and the king of the underworld. And he had to find out what this golden carp was first, and why it was so formidable that it could even eat the shadow of the underworld master. Pah! The golden carp fell back into the magma, splashing up a spray of lava. The violent magma turned back when it encountered the transparent giant wall. As it passed by Jingjiu's body, the flow of the magma changed slightly. These changes were transmitted to the golden carp by the magma. The golden carp swam toward Jingjiu at a high speed. The dense magma didn't seem to have any effect on it. It even acted as a lubricant, making it swim faster. Soon, the golden carp arrived in front of Jingjiu, looking at him curiously with wide eyes. Jingjiu was also looking at the golden carp, noticing that the burning flames of the magma would turn a dark blue color when it swung its tail. Was the temperature of its body even higher than the magma? This golden carp was by no means an ordinary creature, but it looked like a carp. Jingjiu thought to himself, "What the hell are you then?" The golden carp suddenly pouted its mouth and asked as if it were spitting bubbles, "What the hell are you? Who do you think you are? You want to learn from Senior Master?" A disciple of Aoyama stared into Ping Yongjia's eyes and said without concealing his disgust, "You can't participate in the inherited sword competition if you don't have a sword." In the early spring, Aoyama welcomed another inherited sword competition. The inner disciples who had been studying by the stream of sword washing for years waited nervously and excitedly for the selection of their masters. Of course, Ping Yongjia didn't want to miss the opportunity, so he quietly came to the cliff at the end of the stream of sword washing, but was stopped by a classmate who didn't like him. Looking at the high platforms covered by clouds and mist on the cliff, he sighed in his heart, thinking that he couldn't blame anyone, not even Senior Brother Gu on the Shinma Peak. He could only blame himself for being too muddle-headed. Since there hadn't been any news from Senior Brother Gu in the past year, and there was no message this time, what was he doing here? The inner disciples who participated in the inherited sword competition this time were all of good quality, but they certainly couldn't be compared with Jingjiu that year. That year, besides Jingjiu, there were also Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui. Gu Qing didn't become Jingjiu's disciple until the next inherited sword competition, but it was also that year that he made his debut. In that inherited sword competition, there were two with natural Taoist quality, two with invisible sword bodies, and Gu Qing, who had already been confirmed as the emperor's preceptor. It was indeed a rare occasion in hundreds of years. Naturally, no one would forget the most special thing about that inherited sword competition. Jingjiu and Zhao Liu both chose Shinma Peak. Gu Qing also went to Shinma Peak, and even Lu Shisui had a special relationship with Shinma Peak. The inheritance of Shinma Peak continued, and its edge gradually showed. Since then, all the disciples who participated in the inherited sword competition put Shinma Peak as their first choice. Unfortunately, except for the young man surnamed Yuan, who obviously went through the back door, no one else had a chance. Even Shinma Peak didn't participate in the inherited sword competition for several consecutive years. The disciples by the sword-washing stream gradually gave up their worries. The masters of the peaks were on the high platform in the clouds, and some were standing on the mountain path between the cliffs. It was said that fewer sects came to watch the competition because of what happened in the snowfield, but people from Guoqing Temple, Ozawa sect, and Platonist sect still came. Among them, the high platform belonging to Shinma Peak had been vacant for many years. There was a sudden commotion by the stream, and even several exclamations were heard. A figure appeared on that high platform. Someone from Shinma Peak came. Looking at the excited young disciples by the stream, Yuan Chu naturally recalled the scene when he participated in the inherited sword competition. At that time, he played the role of a firm supporter and advocate of Jingjiu. Over the years, he occasionally recalled that if he had not been like that, he might not have been able to go to Shinma Peak even with the help of his great-great-granduncle. Then he sensed the attention from all around and couldn't help complaining secretly, thinking that he was just an errand boy and messenger in Shinma Peak. Why did his master ask him to do this? Those eyes were full of questions and questions. Why did Shinma Peak show up in the inherited sword competition this year? Who would they choose? This kind of thing was not easy to ask, and even if he asked, no one would tell him. Otherwise, he would encounter a lot of trouble in the competition for disciples later. But there was someone who didn't care about this. Junior sister Yushan received the order from her master and walked over from the stone platform of Shangda Peak. She asked curiously, "Who is it?" Of course, Yuan Chu wouldn't answer. He said with a bitter smile, "You'll know in a while." The inherited sword competition began. The young disciples walked to the stream and began to practice their flying swords. Then they looked at Yuan Chu with a face full of hope. Yuan Chu still didn't say anything. Among the disciples of other peaks, there were also many admirers of Zhao Liu and Jingjiu, but it was inevitable that they were a little unhappy in such an atmosphere. At this time, Ping Yongka walked out. He was ready to give up, but seeing the sudden arrival of someone from Shinma Peak, he suddenly had a lot of hope. The elder of Shilai Peak, who presided over the inherited sword competition, looked at him and frowned, asking, "Where's your sword?" Ping Yongka said in a low voice, "I haven't taken it yet." "No sword?" The elder of Shilai Peak suddenly raised his voice and shouted, "If you don't have a sword, why are you participating in the inherited sword competition?" Ping Yongka became unconfident again and murmured, The elder of Shilai Peak didn't let him finish his words and said gloomily, "If you dare to say that you forgot like Jingju did years ago, I will beat you up right now." Ping Yongka spread out his hands and said innocently, "I did forget. There was no one like Jingjiu in the world. So how could he forget to take his sword? More than a year ago, he saw the scene of sword washing by thunder on the top of Bihu Peak. He was deeply shocked and secretly made up his mind to go to the sword peak to take his sword. Unexpectedly, he went through a lot of hardships to climb the sword peak, but he didn't find his sword. Instead, he met two people. Then, Gu Qing specially went to the stream of sword washing to find him. Then, a monkey sent him a letter. In the letter, Gu Qing told him not to hurry to take his sword and to wait for the arrangement. By now, Ping Yongka would be an idiot if he didn't know what kind of good luck he had encountered. As a result, he never went to the Sword Peak again. He happily read and cultivated in the Hall of Sword Washing until today. He was really wrong. He didn't forget the sect rules and the taking of his sword. The problem was, did Gu Qing forget the letter? Without a sword, he couldn't perform the sword work. The proud peers of the Hall of Sword Washing wouldn't challenge him either. Standing on the rock in the stream, Ping Yongka felt quite embarrassed. It was then that two voices broke out on the high platform in the fog. Are you willing to inherit the sword of Tianguang Peak? Are you willing to inherit the sword of Qingrong Peak? There was an uproar by the stream of sword washing. Countless gazes fell on the two stone platforms. Senior Master Mei Li and Lin Wuji exchanged a look, feeling a bit surprised, but they also thought it was reasonable, smiling faintly. They were all there when Gu Qing went to the Hall of Sword Washing to find Ping Yongka. They couldn't miss out on a disciple chosen by Shenma Peak. Yuan Chu was also surprised. He walked to the cliff's edge hastily, saying, "Wait, wait. Young Senior Master chose this child first." Boom! It became more crowded by the stream of sword washing, and it was the same on the cliff. The masters of the peaks walked to the cliff's edge and looked down. Even the guests of Ozawa and the Platonist sect came out, looking very curious. Jingjiu was the most powerful swordsman of the young generation, and was widely recognized as a genius in the sword work. How talented would his disciple be in the sword work? Chapter 457. As expected, Ping Yongka chose Shenma Peak, so people didn't have a chance to witness his talent in sword work. Senior Master Mei Li and Lin Wuji smiled at each other again. They had done their best for Qingrong Peak and Tianguang Peak, so there was nothing they could do. The inherited sword competition wasn't over yet, so Yuan Chu left with Ping Yongka amidst the reluctant gazes of the crowd. When they arrived at the top of Shenma Peak, Yuan Chu asked him to wait here for a while, and then he turned around and ran down the mountain hurriedly, probably to explain something to young Sister Yushan. There was no one on the peak top, except for the remaining snow. Ping Yongka was nervous, but he didn't show it on his face, because he didn't know if the rumored Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu were observing him. Not long after, Gu Qing walked out of the Taoist hall and said to him, "I stayed behind closed doors in autumn, so I forgot to inform you. Fortunately, you didn't forget." Ping Yongka bowed to Jingjiu hastily, thinking that it was not that he didn't forget, but that he was bold and greedy, but he couldn't say these words out loud. Seeing his hesitant expression, Gu Qing said with a smile, "Are you curious why my master chose you?" Ping Yongka nodded repeatedly. By now he knew that the young man and woman he met when he climbed the Sword Peak last year were the two masters of Shenma Peak, but he still felt it odd that he could become a disciple of Shenma Peak because of this, wondering if he had stumbled upon something. Gu Qing asked, "Do you know how high the two masters stayed behind closed doors on the Sword Peak?" Ping Yongka thought about it and said, "I just wanted to climb higher the better, but I was so scared that I had to climb down. I don't know how high it is." Gu Qing said with a smile, "It looks like you don't know how high your talent is." The Sword Peak was difficult to climb. The higher one could climb, the more talented the Aoyama disciple was in swordsmanship. Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu were in seclusion at the Sword Peak, so the place they chose was naturally very high. Therefore, Ping Yongka's talent in swordsmanship was naturally very high. The reason was that simple. Ping Yongka soon figured it out. He scratched his head happily when he remembered that he was a swordsmanship genius recognized by his two masters. Looking at his movements, Gu Qing thought of the monkeys at the foot of the cliff and felt closer to this new younger brother. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Practice hard in the future and don't embarrass your master." After saying this, he turned around and left, preparing to continue cultivating his sword in seclusion in the Taoist temple. Ping Yongka was stunned. Seeing that Gu Qing was about to enter the Taoist temple, he panicked and shouted, "That? Senior brother, what should I do next?" Gu Qing stopped, turned around and said, "If you have finished your lessons in the sword garret, you should cultivate your sword first. As for which peak's real sword to cultivate, we will decide when our master comes back." Ping Yongka opened his eyes wide and asked, "Cultivate sword? You told me not to rush to get a sword, but I don't have one now." Gu Qing said, "If you don't have a sword, cultivate your will first. As for the sword, you don't have to worry. Otherwise, it will be troublesome when our master wants to change your sword in the future." This was his personal experience. He was now in the state of free travel and had cultivated the sword ghost. If he suddenly wanted to change his sword, it would be a big problem. Even if the sword was the sword of the universe, he still felt it was troublesome. Ping Yongka didn't know his worries and was very happy to hear his words. He thought that the Shenma Peak could get a free flying sword, which was a great benefit. There were two notable events in this year's inherited sword competition in Aoyama. Shenma Peak recruited a new disciple, but Liangwang Peak didn't show up. The disciples of Liangwang Peak were all in the far north, fighting in the front line against the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. Many elders and disciples of other peaks also went to White Town, led by Fang Jingtian. In the early spring, White Town was very cold. White smoke could be seen everywhere in the military camp built on the mountain. There was no hot spring there, but there were countless barrels filled with hot water. There had been several small monster tides in recent years. The northern battlefront army didn't lose too many soldiers, but there were many wounded soldiers, so they needed hot water and medicine. The doctor monks of Guoqing Temple were responsible for the latter, and the sects that were good at talisman Taoism, such as Yamatsai, were responsible for the former, including heating and logistics. The disciples of Aoyama were responsible for killing the enemies as they had done in the past years. Dozens of sword lights returned from the snowland and landed on the field in front of the mountain. Guananshan glanced over and counted the number of people again. He felt a bit relieved after making sure that none of his colleagues were left behind in the snowland. Gu Han, Yu Siluo, Jian Ruoshui, and other disciples of Liangwang Peak had all entered the free travel state, and their fighting prowess was very strong. They led their colleagues in hunting down those powerful monsters that had escaped from the battlefield and might head south. It wasn't a head-on battlefield, but it was more dangerous. Over the last few years, 7 disciples of Aoyama had been sent back to Aoyama with severe wounds. As the monster tides appeared more frequently and more powerfully, death would come soon. What worried them was that the deviant sects on the cold mountain were ready to take action as the situation in the snowland became tense. Guananshan said, "I only hope that the cultivationists of the Kunlun sect can control the situation." Gu Han said expressionlessly, "With those useless things? In my opinion, we should clean up the cold mountain while the snowland is quiet for the time being, so as to intimidate those evildoers." "Don't count me in for this," a feeble voice came out from the crowd. Guananshan and the others looked in the direction of the voice and found it was Zhuoruzhui, their expressions changing slightly. Gu Han stared at him and said, "Do you want to see the deviant sects like the mysterious dark sect take advantage of the situation and grow stronger?" Zhuoruzhui said listlessly with drooping eyelids, "They are called the mysterious dark church now. Judging from the name, it is obvious that they are opposing the Windy Broadsword Church. Even the Broadsword King isn't worried about it. Why are you people worried about it?" People looked at him with complicated expressions in their eyes. Zhuoruzhui had a great reputation among the disciples of the young generation. He had finally come out from behind closed doors on top of Tianguang Peak at the sword trial of Aoyama and defeated Zhao Liu, which boosted his reputation even more. The disciples of Liangwang Peak hoped that he could compete with Jingjiu. Unexpectedly, after he lost to Jingjiu on Cloud Dream Mountain, his style of doing things became more and more like the people on Shinma Peak. As for what kind of style of doing things was, nobody could explain it clearly, not even Jian Ruoshui, who hated Shinma Peak the most. It was probably because he was afraid of trouble or that thing. No one came to the snowland from Shinma Peak this time, but Zhuoruzhui was the personal disciple of the immortal sect master, so he had to come. Yet, he was different from Guananshan. One couldn't find any of the good qualities of fighting bravely, taking the lead in everything, or leading by example. Jian Ruoshui said to Zhuoruzhui with a gloomy expression, "If you are as afraid of death as Gu Qing, you shouldn't have come." Hearing this, Gu Han's expression changed slightly, but he didn't say anything. Zhuoruzhui looked at Jian Ruoshui and raised his head slowly. He didn't want to show his disdain by looking down at him, but he was going to say, As the first disciple of Tianguang Peak, Guananshan had heard his master Lu Ci say many times, so he knew what Zhuoruzhui wanted to do. He shouted in a deep voice, "Shut up, all of you!" Zhuoruzhui thought, "I don't need to open my mouth to say Does Big Brother's words have anything to do with me?" Yusiluo suddenly looked in the direction of the snowland and asked, "Who is that?" It had been less than 100 days since the end of the last war, and there were still many dangers in the snowland. Why would someone come out alone? That person's movements were extremely strange. He came to the edge of the snowland from the Black Mountain in less than a minute, and nobody could see how he did it. Gu Han asked, "Is he from Zhongzhou School?" In most people's impression, only the escape method of heaven and earth from Zhongzhou School could be so elusive and unpredictable. Guananshan shook his head and said, "It's Hejan." The disciples of Aoyama were quite startled. That person walked out of the snowland and came to the front of the military camp. His monk robe was in tatters, looking as messy as his newly grown hair. Looking at Hejan, the expressions in the crowd's eyes were different. Gu Han asked with furrowed eyebrows, "Is he the first successor of experiencing the mortal world who has been in public since the beginning?" Now that he was going to experience the mortal world, he had to conceal his identity in order to perceive the true meaning of the mortal world. Over the years, the successors of experiencing the mortal world in the Guoqing Temple had done the same thing. They wouldn't reveal their identities until they had accomplished their feat. The previous successor of experiencing the mortal world, the broadsword King Chao Yuan, chose to stay in the north instead of taking over as the chief monk of the Guoqing Temple, but he had concealed his identity at the Windy Broadsword Church for many years. It was evident that Hejan had experienced a series of arduous battles in the snowland and was wounded badly, but nobody in the military camp went to greet him. It was not because the doctor monks of the Guoqing Temple were too busy, or because the masters disliked him for being too ostentatious and ruining the intention of experiencing the mortal world. It was because someone had gone to greet him. Along with the crisp ringing of the bell, Sensei, the young master of the Platonist sect, came to the front of Hejan like a band of green smoke and held his arm, showing a concerned expression on her small face. "Are you all right?" Hejan shook his head. Sensei felt relieved and asked, "Are you going to the birthday party of the Grandmaster or not? I can't stay here for too long. I have a lot of things to arrange." Hejan shook his head again. Sensei lifted her small face and pleaded, "You should go. My mother wants to see you." Hejan didn't say anything. Sensei said in a sorrowful voice, "Something serious will happen that day. I'm scared. I hope you can be by my side." Hejan still didn't say anything. Sensei got angry. She shook off his hand and said, "Don't try to deceive me. I've asked Big Sister Lei. The Guoqing Temple doesn't practice the vow of silence." He-Jean kept his mouth shut and walked on without saying anything. Sensei halted her steps and looked at his back while standing in the snow. "I'm crying," she said in a sobbing tone. "I'm telling you, I'm going to cry." He-Jean's body stiffened slightly. He turned around slowly and said to her, "I found Jiang Rei's corpse in the snowland." Sensei had been pretending to cry. Hearing this, the sobbing tone in her voice disappeared. "It's a pity," she said in a serious and sympathetic tone. He-Jean said, "What can you do even if you let him go?" Sensei said proudly, "What can I do even if I kill him?" He-Jean sighed and turned around to walk on. His movements were as elusive as a ghost. Sensei knew that she couldn't catch up with him. She felt both angry and curious, wondering where he had learned such a peculiar movement. She suddenly thought of the method He-Jean learned from the old eunuch Hong in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. She covered her mouth in surprise, wondering if he had really cut himself open. There was a mountain behind White Town. There was a small temple at the foot of the mountain. There was a golden Buddha statue in the temple. There had been no monk in this temple before, but there was one now. He was a young monk with the highest status in the Zen sections. Zen master had been in White Town for 7 years. He had been playing in the mud in this small temple over the last 7 years. He would go out once in a while to show off his skills. If Zen master were Guodong a few years ago, the Broadsword King would be much more satisfied. Zen master was not satisfied either, feeling bored. The mountain of sticks suddenly collapsed, scattering on the ground in front of the doorsill. It was unclear what kind of omen it represented. Zen master glanced at it twice, but he didn't figure it out, so he gave up. "When can I go back?" he asked after stretching himself. The deep and feeble voice rang out in the temple. "Are you in a hurry?" Zen master said, "The temple is in chaos, and Du Hai has almost made a grave mistake, but I can't go back. How can I not be anxious?" The Broadsword King said, "Peace will come after the winner is determined in the snowland." The expression in Zen master's eyes grew a bit colder as he said, "Peace has reappeared in the human world. Maybe you have to go back." After a moment of silence, the Broadsword King said, "I wonder if the commotion on the cold mountain has anything to do with that immortal." Zen master said, "You don't have to worry too much about the mysterious dark sect. After they were slaughtered by the Aoyama sect back then, they only have that Tao banner left." "That Tao banner is indeed strange," said the Broadsword King. "Of course," Zen master said, "otherwise, the Aoyama sect would have attacked them already." The Aoyama sect and the mysterious dark sect had been enemies for generations. If the sun banner hadn't been successfully tempered, which made it hard to deal with the mysterious dark sect, the Aoyama sect wouldn't allow the mysterious dark sect to show off their prowess on the cold mountain and change their sect to a church. It was then that a squeaking sound could be heard behind the temple. It was the terrifying sound of the twisting cliffs and the rocks rubbing against each other. Zen master got up and walked to the doorsill. Many houses in White Town had collapsed, the smoke and dust rising up. Fortunately, the windy Broadsword Church had driven away all the believers and residents, so there wouldn't be too many casualties. The commotion in the distant snowland was even more shocking. The wind and snow rose up with a whistling sound, reaching a height of 1,000 feet in the sky, and the Black Mountains could be vaguely seen swaying. It was a dreadful earthquake. Zen master's line of sight passed through the smoke and dust, the wind and snow, and the quaking Black Mountains, falling on the deep end of the snowland. A strong sense of alertness showed in his eyes. It was a powerful energy. The human cultivation practitioners at the edge of the snowland came to their senses and flew into the sky, ready to fight. The sword light flashed and the sword light pierced through the sky. An extremely powerful sword will appeared at the forefront. Fang Jingtian is no match for him. Zen master said in a cold voice, "Ask everyone to retreat." Fang Jingtian wasn't famous in the cultivation circle, But Zen Master and the Broadsword King knew that it was because this Shilai Peak master of the Aoyama sect had kept a low profile for 300 years. Fang Jingtian was the fourth disciple of Taiping Jinren. He was in the peak state of Broken Sea and had the potential to reach the heavenly arrival state, so he was a top-notch swordsman of the human race. Even Bu Qiuxiao, the master of Yamatsai, could only fight him to a draw. At the moment, he was the strongest in White Town apart from the Broadsword King and Zen Master. Even Fang Jingtian was no match for him, so it was obvious who the intruder was. It was no wonder that Zen Master was so vigilant. The bell rang in the small temple, indicating that all the cultivation practitioners should leave the battlefield as soon as possible. "Is it big or small?" That deep and incomplete voice suddenly became extremely mellow, like the bell that was still echoing at the edge of the snowy plains. That was because the owner of this voice had already prepared to fight to the death in an extremely short period of time. He had guarded the wind and snow alone for more than 100 years. He had entered the snowland and fought a few times with the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom, but he came back with severe wounds each time, with no chance of winning. As Jingjiu had said, the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom was the being of the highest state in Chaotian. No one could match her, save for Jingjiu when he ascended. If the Queen walked out of the snowland, who could stop her? He had thought about this question many times. Though he couldn't come to a conclusion in the end, he had figured out one thing. No matter who could stop her, they had to do so. As such, the day the Queen walked out of the snowland would be the day of his death. End of this chapter. Chapter 458. Was it the big one or the small one? He wasn't asking about the number in the dice cup, nor was he asking about the portion of the hot pot. Looking at the deep end of the snowland, Zen Master suddenly looked more relaxed, saying, "It should be the small one." The voice of the Broadsword King rang out again. He was obviously much more relaxed as he said, "You go then." Zen Master lifted his bare foot and rubbed it against the mud on the doorsill, asking with his head lowered, "Why?" The Broadsword King said, "I'll take care of the big one, and you take care of the small one. Didn't we agree before you came?" Zen Master lifted his head and slowly rolled up his sleeves to the crook of his arm, saying, "Though I'm young, I'm much older than you in my previous life." The Broadsword King didn't pay any attention to him. His meaning was clear. How dare you call your fist as big as a bowl big? The bell rang out from the temple, passing through White Town and echoing on the edge of the snowland. The human cultivation practitioners retreated as fast as they could. The swift and fierce sword light was the last to disappear from the sky. In the camp outside White Town, there were only the wounded who didn't have time to evacuate and the monk doctors from the Guoqing Temple and the Baodong Zen Temple. Zen Master leapt up in the air, and a lotus flower bloomed where his bare foot landed. The lotus flowers flew toward the deep end of the snowland, fading away along with the cold wind. In a few seconds, he had already arrived in the sky above the snowland dozens of miles away. The violent wind and snow had gradually calmed down, and the view became much clearer. The earthquake had peeled off the accumulated snow on the mountains, exposing the black mountain bodies, which looked very striking in the sky, like a red bean bun in white sugar. The corpses of all kinds of demons of the Snowy Kingdom were everywhere between the snowland and the black mountains. The blood of those demons was not red. Smeared on the snowland, it looked like a color smeared by a child carelessly, but the thick smell of blood still soared into the sky. Countless beetle carcasses were scattered around the corpses of the monsters, looking like ice crystals. Standing on the lotus cloud, Zen Master rubbed his nose. These were not the corpses left behind by the previous monster invasion, but the result of the earthquake. The war between the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom and her child was truly dreadful. It was practically a catastrophe for the lives on the snowland. Zen Master even saw the corpses of dozens of humanoid snow monsters further away. The human cultivators had learned a lot about the Snowy Kingdom. They knew that this kind of human-shaped snow monster had terrifying combat abilities, which were equal to the elders in the cultivation sections. However, this kind of snow monster rarely appeared at the edge of the snowfield. Other than the great beast tied several hundred years ago, no one had ever seen it again. According to the observations of the powerful cultivators of the previous generation, these human-shaped snow monsters should be the close servants or bodyguards of Her Majesty the Queen. They lived in the Blue Glacier area 20,000 miles to the north. However, they had appeared at the edge of the snowfield and died without a sound. Had they chosen the wrong side and been killed by the Queen? Or were they the masters of the imperial court who were pursuing the princess? In the small temple, the Zen master had clearly sensed that terrifying qi, but when he arrived on the lotus cloud, he discovered that the qi had disappeared. He closed his eyes, and a few shallow wrinkles suddenly appeared on his young face. The lotus cloud released dozens of extremely thin threads, drifting towards the sky and the ground. Those thin threads carried a mysterious and indescribable meaning, and it was hard to tell what was real or fake. This was the supreme dhyana technique of the Guoqing Temple, the two minds connection. At the peak of the two minds connection, if one stood close, they could know what the other was thinking. It was as wondrous as reading minds. Even if they didn't know who the other was or where they were, they could use this dhyana technique to sense the other's approximate position and understand the other's general state. After an unknown amount of time, the Zen master opened his eyes and muttered, "Even evil dragons don't eat their children. The queen is too vicious." The Snow Queen was a high-level life form, but completely different from humans. She was also completely different from the ancient divine beasts of the various sections. Humans didn't know much about her, but they knew that she didn't know how to scheme. Because as the ruler of the northern continent, an invincible supreme expert, she didn't need to do such things. Zen Master sensed that the little fellow was hiding in the mountainous snow-worm corpses, and was indeed slightly surprised. The little fellow's injuries were extremely severe. The instinctive fear that originated from its life force made it learn to hide its qi. It seemed that in this battle for the throne of the Snow Queen, only death awaited the loser. Therefore, the little fellow was willing to pay any price to escape the snowy plains. Even if it couldn't go too south because of the temperature, humans wouldn't be able to bear it. They had to keep it in the snowy plains at all cost. The lotus cloud suddenly scattered. The Zen master fell from the sky like a stone, landing on the snowy plains. The thick layer of snow and the beetle corpses on the surface were shattered, scattering in all directions like white smoke. The Zen master's bare feet stepped on the frost and snow. He pointed at a wisp of white smoke, his voice like thunder as he shouted, "Freeze!" That wisp of white smoke suddenly stilled, faintly revealing an appearance. It was a white figure. The snowy plains were filled with white. That figure was also white. The reason it could be distinguished was because its whiteness was purer and deeper. It was clearly white and flawless, but it was like the darkest night, extremely eye-catching. It took only a moment for the white figure to get rid of the binding of Zen Master's will and turn into a wisp of white smoke again, fleeing toward the southeast. The human cultivation practitioners standing on the flying swords and magic treasures in the distance remained silent while looking at the scene in the snowy plains, wondering if this was the rumored child of the queen. The formation presided over by Yamatsai had already been activated. The amulets on the city walls of the northern kingdom, which stretched for 1,000 miles, exuded a powerful energy. The magic army of the imperial court and the followers of the Windy Broadsword Church each guarded a section of the city wall. The commander and the church master of the Windy Broadsword leapt up into the sky, staring at the wisp of white smoke cautiously. Fang Jingtian came to the empty realm, standing on the fairy sword and watching the commotion below, ready to wield his sword at any moment. According to the judgment of Zen Master and the Broadsword King, He was not a match for this wisp of white smoke, but it was evident that his opponent was wounded severely, so he had to seize the opportunity. In the distant eastern sky, a powerful and tranquil energy was concealed. It should be the immortal Tan, the sect master of Zhongzhou school, guarding the place. The Snowy Kingdom was the greatest threat to the human race. Even though it was not the invincible queen who showed up that day but her child, the human race still had to be on high alert. The border between the human world and the Snowy Kingdom was at least tens of thousands of miles long, but it was strange that the monster invasions had always passed through the snowy plains and valleys around White Town for many years. If the cold mountain and the barren land were located in the southwest, where there were too many underground fire sources, and the life forms in the Snowy Kingdom were the natural enemies, why didn't they pass through the east? This was a question that had been troubling the human race for a long time, but they hadn't been able to find the answer. However, it was a fortunate thing for the human race. All they needed to do was to defend White Town. The wisp of white smoke had no intention of retreating to the deep part of the snowy land. It attempted to break through the human defense line in the southeast and leave the snowy land. It was evident that it would rather face the collective attack of the human swordsmen than go back and face its mother. Reticent, the young Zen master kicked his right leg backward to the back of his left leg, falling down on the ground. The ground was covered with the frosted snow and the corpses of the snow beetles. The corpses didn't have the color of blood, but they had a pungent smell of blood and a strong smell of death. Zen master sat among the corpses with his eyes closed, but he didn't show any demonic nature. He looked like a real Buddha. His hands bloomed like a lotus flower in front of him, and he soon made 13 hand gestures in the wind and snow. A circular mirror of light appeared behind him, on which were innumerable scripts, glinting with golden light. The Zen intent was profound, benevolent, and yet murderous. The cultivation practitioners and the magic army in the human camp had all left, except for the severely wounded and the monk doctors. Over 200 monk doctors of the Guoqing temple walked out of the camp and sat down cross-legged on the snowy ground, starting to recite the scripts. May my mother escape from hell forever, and live until she is 13 years old, free of all serious crimes and free of all evils. All the Buddhas in the world are merciful to me, and hear the great vow I make for my mother. If my mother leaves the 3 paths forever, she will be so lowly, and even a woman will never be punished. May my mother, from today on, look at the pure lotus flower in front of the Tathagata statue, and realize the right enlightenment in the world that will follow in the billions of tribulations. The scripts floated at the edge of the snowy plain. Innumerable seemingly real characters flashed with golden light as they floated into the sky, forming a mirror of light. This mirror of light looked exactly the same as the transparent mirror behind Zen Master, except that it was at least 1,000 times larger, and seemed to cover half the sky. Moreover, this mirror of light was not transparent. Its color was extremely dark, and its quality was like the earth. Zen Master opened his eyes, his gaze murderous. He shouted, "Absorb!" The enormous mirror of light in the sky slowly began to move. The scripts on the mirror gave off countless rays of golden light, condensed into a beam of light by an invisible power, and shot towards the snowy plain. The beam of light landed precisely on the transparent mirror behind Zen Master, and then passed through it, changing direction, and at the same time increasing its power by countless times. The beam of light followed Zen Master's gaze and hit the white smoke. There was a loud boom. The white smoke gave an angry howl, scattering into flying snow, and retreating into the depths of the snowy plain with a gust of wind. More than half of a black mountain collapsed, the snowy plain shook, and dense clouds rolled in the sky. The 200 or so doctor monks sitting cross-legged on the ground could no longer maintain their posture, and all fell down. A sky full of wind and snow fell on Zen Master's body. He did not pay attention to them, and just walked back from the snowy plain. As he walked, the snowflakes fell from his monk's robes. There was a patch of snow that was very dark. It was not dyed with dust. It was a deep white. Note: the sutra that the doctor monks of Guoqing Temple chanted was a passage from the Ksitigarbha Sutra, and a part was deleted. I feel that it is especially interesting to use on the queen and her daughter. Also, I wrote Jian Ruoyun as Jian Ruoshui yesterday. Did you not forget about Jian Shui'er when you were mocked? A few days ago, I wrote Ping Yongka as Ping Yongjia, and there are still some mistakes. Like I said that day, I have been really tired recently, and I will revise it when I have time in a few days. Today is Christmas Eve. Whether or not there is a holiday, I wish everyone peace and happiness. I really like her who is about to walk out of the snowy plain. It is not that kind of like, but I really want to write an image that has not been written before. I hope I can write it, and if I can't, don't blame me. End of this chapter. Chapter 459. Zen Master returned to the small temple behind White Town. He lifted his arm and wiped the sweat off his forehead with his sleeve. "Thank you for your hard work," the Broadsword King said in his deep and feeble voice. "It didn't take much effort to beat up a little kid." Zen Master turned around and looked at the scattered sticks outside the doorsill. He shook his head and was about to pick up the sticks with his head lowered. This movement triggered the injury in his body. Puff! The blood sprayed out from his mouth like a mist, falling on the doorsill and those thin sticks. It was deathly quiet in the small temple. The Broadsword King didn't speak. It was as quiet as a graveyard. After a long while, Zen Master straightened his body slowly and sighed with a complicated emotion while looking at the deep part of the snowland. The deathly silence and the sigh were all due to the pressure the snowy kingdom exerted on the humans. "I'll call someone to clean it up later." Zen Master lifted his arm and wiped the blood off the corners of his mouth with his sleeve. He remained silent for a long time while looking in the direction of the snowland. He employed the magic of the precious mirror to wound the white figure severely and force her back to the deep part of the snowland, but he paid a heavy price for it. About 23 years? How could that little guy be so powerful? The young Zen Master suddenly said. During the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting, the snowland had a sudden change. Heaven and earth turned cold all of a sudden, and many young cultivation practitioners who participated in the cultivation tournament died. Jingjiu and Bai Zhao were trapped for 6 years, because the queen of the Snowy Kingdom was pregnant. Even though she had started cultivating in the womb, it was merely 20 years since the child had become so powerful. The bloodline of a high state was indeed formidable. "The humans can't resist the two queens," said the Broadsword King. Zen Master said, "Fortunately, our speculation was correct. It looks like the mother and daughter didn't show any mercy when they harmed each other." The Broadsword King asked, "Why do you insist that she gave birth to a daughter? Can't she give birth to a son?" "The Queen of the North has existed since the beginning of human record. Who has ever heard of the Emperor of the Snowy Kingdom?" Zen Master continued, "Speaking of which, you're the only one in Chaotian who has seen her." The Sword Saint's voice disappeared for a long time before it sounded again. "Although I've fought her before, I've never seen her in person." Zen Master understood his meaning and didn't pursue the matter further. The regular cultivation practitioners would fight at a distance, especially the sword practitioners of Aoyama and the No Mercy sect. When peerless experts fought, they would often be separated by dozens of miles, hundreds of miles, or even further. Back when Lu Ci and the godly swordsmen of West Ocean fought, they were separated by an ocean. So it was normal for Sword Saint to say that he had never seen Ice Queen. As for the battle in such a state, would it make people feel that it wasn't hot-blooded enough? Could it be that experts of this realm would have to stare at each other like ordinary people in the streets, spittle flying everywhere? In the deepest part of the Gatherer's Soul Valley, in front of the transparent wall that isolated the abyss, in the scorching hot magma. A beautiful person and a golden fish were facing each other, staring at each other. What exactly was this thing? This was the thought shared by both Jingjiu and the golden carp. The only difference was that the latter had spoken it out. The fish puckered its lips into a cute circle, spitting out a string of words that looked like bubbles and some spittle at the same time. The spittle splashed onto Jingjiu's face. He felt a stinging pain, so he reached out his hand to touch his face. The golden carp was surprised that this person could survive in such hot magma, and his own liquid fire couldn't even penetrate his skin. How could this be possible? Jingjiu was baffled as well, wondering if this fish's spittle was even hotter than the magma. Was he a powerful demon who had survived a great war in ancient times? Thinking of the huge skeleton that had turned into powder on the battlefield in the barren plain, Jingjiu denied this idea, and had a new idea about the origin of the golden carp. "Are you a cultivation friend from Zhongzhou school?" he asked. The golden carp's puckered mouth became rounder, and it was evident that he was surprised, asking, "How did you guess it?" This was the bottom of the Gather Soul Valley, and the transparent wall was the forbidding formation used by Zhongzhou school to seal off the passage. If such a strange fish suddenly appeared in the river of magma, even a monkey of Shuriwe Peak would know that this person had something to do with Zhongzhou school. Thinking of all this, Jingjiu asked, "May I know your Taoist name?" A proud expression showed in the eyes of the golden carp, as he said, "I'm the divine beast of Cloud Dream, the fire carp, also known as the king of fire carps. I'm good at swallowing the soul fire, so I was invited here by the mountain gate to guard the passage in the underworld." This fire carp was a spirit bred naturally by the underground fire. He had lived in the underground river of magma since he was a child, and he liked the fire and couldn't live without it. He wasn't invited here by Zhongzhou school. It was because Zhongzhou school found that this carp couldn't be kept on Cloud Dream Mountain after they tamed him at the bottom of the Gather Soul Valley, so they had to leave him here and guard the passage. He had been kept in the underground fire for more than 20,000 years. In terms of age, no one was older than him, save for the ancient divine beasts like the unicorn and the round turtle. Even Ada had to call him Senior Master. But the problem was that this kind of natural spirit grew very slowly, and he often needed to sleep for a long time to recuperate. As a result, he hadn't reached adulthood yet. The fire carp should have slept for more than 1,000 years this time, but he had woken up 2 years ago in advance for some reason. He was already in a bad mood, and he encountered something else that day, which made him so angry. Jingjiu didn't know about this, but he thought that Zhongzhou school was indeed a cultivation sect that could compete with Aoyama on occasion. Its resources were indeed profound. The problem with Aoyama was that the sword Dao was too straight. When two Daos fought, it was difficult for two swords to generate fire, and the killing was too strong. In the past tens of thousands of years, the killing between the peaks of Aoyama was too brutal. Many secrets had disappeared in the dark night along with the sudden death of the previous masters. Among them, the closest and cruelest killing was what Tai Pingzhenren led them to do. Jingjiu thought that he should go to the sword jail to visit Senior Master Tai Lu after he returned to Green Mountain. Perhaps there was a formidable figure hiding in the underground of the Hermit Peaks. If so, the number of the 4 principal guards would increase to 5, or even more. "If I'm the king of fire carp, then who are you? Fire boy?" The golden carp was extremely curious when he saw how calm he was in the scorching lava, and that he could even speak. Jingjiu of Aoyama. He forgot to cover his face with the sword force. Even if he covered his face in the lava, he couldn't hide it from the perception of the fire carp. Afterward, the fire carp only needed to describe him, and the Zhongzhou school would know who he was. It was pointless to give him a fake name. The fire carp blinked his eyes and said, "I'm sorry, but I have to kill you." "Why?" Jingjiu asked. The fire carp waved his tail, saying, Don't be nervous. We don't have a grudge against each other. But I remember someone said before I went to sleep last time that the relationship between our two families wasn't that good. Even though he hadn't reached adulthood and wasn't a real divine beast, he was as powerful as Lu Ada in the underground river of fire. It wouldn't be difficult for him to kill Jingjiu. Have you been to the Cloud Dream Mountain? Jingjiu asked with an unchanged expression. The fire carp was taken aback, and then he said, No. Do the disciples of the Zhongzhou school usually come to see you? Jingjiu asked. It was so hot in the river of lava that even a cultivation practitioner would turn into a puff of smoke if he fell in. Since the immortals Tan and Bai and the important figures of the Zhongzhou school wouldn't come here often, he was sure that nobody would come to see the golden carp. Who said no? The Cloud Dream Mountain sends a disciple to see me every 600 years, and I can communicate with the Cloud Dream Mountain through the air. If something happens to the passage, I can tell them immediately. I used to talk with them when I was awake. Besides, it was just a few days ago. Oh, it's nothing. The fire carp found that he had made a slip of the tongue, so he stopped talking immediately. His lips formed a smaller circle, making him look even more adorable. Even if the relationship between our two sects isn't good, you don't have to kill me. Moreover, my relationship with the Zhongzhou school has always been good. Jingjiu went on earnestly. The first disciple of the Zhongzhou school I knew was called Xiang Wanshu. Later, I became a chess friend with a disciple of the Zhongzhou school named Tong Yen. Well, you probably know the daughter of the current sect master of the Zhongzhou school, Bai Zhao. I have a good relationship with her. You can ask her. Hearing the name of Tong Yen, a strange expression flashed in the eyes of the fire carp, but he didn't change his mind. I can't do that, he said sneakily. It's because I saw you talking to that important figure of the underworld. A thief like you who has secret dealings with the underworld can't live. He didn't know that the short man in the blue cloth was the underworld master, but he could sense through the huge transparent wall that this person's cultivation state was much higher than his own, so he could guess that this person had an extraordinary background. The fire carp felt proud when he thought that he was so clear-headed even though he had just woken up 2 years ago. He suddenly saw Jingjiu leave the lava and come to the shore. You dare run away, he yelled anxiously. Jingjiu of course wanted to run away. It would be easy for him to die while facing this fire carp in the lava. As Jingjiu raised his right hand and was about to leave, the fire carp in the lava river raised his tail and slapped it down forcefully. Boom! A great amount of hot red lava shot up from the river, shooting toward the cliff walls like a heavy downpour. Not only was the lava extremely hot, but it also contained a terrifying power. Jingjiu took back the sword of the universe from the space and held it in front of him as a shield. A series of cracking sounds could be heard. Jingjiu's feet left 2 straight and shallow grooves on the ground, and he didn't stop until his back bumped against the cliff walls. Dozens of glowing marks appeared on the surface of the sword of the universe. Fortunately, the sword was very broad, so no lava fell on Jingjiu's body. This fire carp was too formidable. Jingjiu of course couldn't defeat him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have talked so much about their chess friends and their close relationship. The fire carp leapt out of the lava river and headed toward Jingjiu with an unimaginably high temperature and formidable energy. As the fire carp arrived in front of Jingjiu, Jingjiu suddenly turned his left hand over. Hovering in the air, the fire carp stared at Jingjiu's palm and asked cautiously, "What the hell is this?" A white beetle was lying on the palm of Jingjiu's left hand, exuding a faint but lingering cold intent. It was none other than cold cicada. The state of cold cicada was very low. It could only be ranked at the bottom in the snowland, so it was of no threat to a high-level life form like the fire carp. However, the purest cold intent exuded by cold cicada made the fire carp feel a bit uneasy. "It's the most formidable being in the snowy kingdom," said Jingjiu. The fire carp suddenly laughed out loud. His lips were changing from round to flat, and his two slightly red front fins were flapping against the fish's body. It seemed that his belly hurt from laughing too much. Do you really think I don't know anything just because I'm isolated from the outside world? Do you really think I'm stupid and ignorant because I'm so adorable? Jingju said after some thought. I take back what I said earlier. Cold Cicada stole a glance at Jingjiu, feeling both innocent and resentful. The fire carp had finally stopped laughing. I wanted to play with you a little longer, but I couldn't help it, he said while panting slightly. If you could bring the Ice Queen with you, I would let you go without saying a word. Even if you brought those snowy demons who have transformed into human beings with you, I would still be afraid of you. But you want to scare me off by bringing a snowy beetle of the lowest state with you? I really don't understand. What are you thinking? That's what I'm thinking, said Jingjiu. Cold Cicada understood what Jingjiu was thinking. It turned its body around as quickly as possible, pointing its head at the sky. It was evident that this was a gesture of submission. Are you going to give this snowy beetle to me as a gift? The fire carp said angrily. No, even if you want to bribe this king, can you at least give me something valuable? I think that huge sword of yours is pretty good. Jingjiu didn't give a response. Cold Cicada suddenly rubbed its limbs against each other, making a deep and low buzzing sound, looking like a real cicada in autumn. The expression in the eyes of the fire carp suddenly changed. It was because he sensed that this snowy beetle was not acting cute, but had released some objects. Those objects were very small, so small that he couldn't even see them. The fire carp sensed a strong uneasiness. He wagged his tail and said to Jingjiu, Brother, let's talk this out. End of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.